In ancient times, it is rumored, God raised a wall to test humanity. The magical wall divided the terrestrial continent and unleashed chaos throughout the world. Thus, humans faced horrible monsters, creatures sprung from hell itself. Many settlements were destroyed in attacks by ruthless beings with incredible strength. In a world ravaged by misfortune, countless people disappeared inside the wall for no apparent reason. And then, the tears of those condemned to suffer the loss of their loved ones flooded the continent's borders. At the moment the world was almost collapsing, a man unexpectedly appeared, whom they called a hero. The intrepid Carlos Arthur Ingram knew no fear when facing the darkness that descended upon the world. Thanks to his amazing abilities, he saved the continent and soon founded his Caeta Empire. Thus began the war. Hundreds of years later, everything happened in the Caeta Pacific Empire. The sudden arrival of the Countess made the emperor think that something terrible had happened. Being a first-rank knight of the empire, Rustica Cheens held the title of Genius Swordsman Mage. The war against the wall has been going on for hundreds of years, but the number of monsters does not decrease. And people keep disappearing. In the last incursion, the knights were short-handed, forcing them to sacrifice the soldiers' children. Apparently, this combat tactic was no longer suitable for the imperial squadron. Therefore, Rustica thought it would be better for the Caeta Empire to cross the wall. At that moment, the young woman was out of reach of the dark forces ordering her to be silent. The brilliant knight of the empire did not understand how great her arrogance was in saying such nonsense. By enraging the great emperor, Rustica was trapped in his furious anger because she had lost everything: her excellent sword and magic skills, the honor, and the title granted to her as a knight, and also the support of all those people who admired her, literally everything she had. It was time for the girl to open her eyes. From now on, only a dark present awaited her. Rustica opened her eyes when she woke up again from that horrible nightmare that was already sickening her. Yesterday at Uncle Ben's tavern, she had drunk too much. Her head was so clouded by the hangover that the heroine noticed, almost by a miracle, that she woke up with a man. Immediately, fleeting shameful memories of the previous night began to surface. Rustica Jens couldn't believe that the feeling of loneliness had affected her so much. She decided to remember this frivolous and irrational night as a one-time action. Although the girl was ashamed to run away in the morning, she really needed to escape. Hearing the door slam, the man woke up alone in an empty apartment. In reality, Rustica didn't believe that on such a beautiful day, she would be suffering from a deadly hangover. The shame before others was so great that she couldn't even lift her head. Rumors were circulating behind her that she didn't leave home and only appeared drunk. No one understood how a young woman who got along well with her children had ended up like this. And the protagonist thought the same. Her own destiny greatly intrigued her. Rustica preferred to be an outcast rather than watch others be disappointed in her. She didn't want rumors spreading that Miss Janice had lost all her powers at once. And now she lived in the forest. All she had left was to pretend she didn't exist. And then, little by little, everyone would forget about her. It was the best option. Finally, upon arriving home, the protagonist decided to take her medicine as soon as possible. She believed she was possessed. She had never taken such a risk. Exhausted, she collapsed onto the bed. How much shame she felt. She had to live in silence, not get drunk at Uncle Ben's and talk uncontrollably. With these thoughts, Rustica slept until night, feeling something strange. She gripped her sword and went out to sense a wild beast's energy. It smelled of blood. The beast must be near, very near. Following her instinct, the huntress tracked the origin of the stench. In the forest, a mysterious guy knocked down 2 bears and fled. The heroine had to know who that brave fighter was, but she saw that it was the boy with whom she spent the previous night. The protagonist had no idea what that man was doing there. He was surely sleeping when she left, so she thought he had followed her. Furious, the girl demanded that he bother to explain what was happening. It turned out that she didn't remember sharing bread with him as children. She even thought she only gave bread to him. Disappointment was evident in her voice, as others also received chocolate from the lady. That was more important than his wounds. It was incredible that she didn't remember anything. At that moment, the image of a child soldier she saw on a wall came to mind, and she dared to abandon that same boy, hurting his feelings. After years of incessant searching, the gentleman was happy to see her again. Despite his wounds, the young man supposed that something hadn't gone well last night due to his inexperience. Yesterday was his first time, but he promised to strive in the future so that the noble lady would not leave him alone. Whether due to shame or wounds, the boy collapsed on her unconscious. After all, she had to take him home and heal his wounds. If he were a normal man, he would have died long ago from the rupture of his internal organs. Even for a knight of the imperial order, defeating two bears almost barehanded is a difficult task. If they really met at the wall, then Rua was a knight and was 18 years old. Although she vaguely remembered him, even then his face stood out among the others. However, the boy was still very small, so the young woman thought she had gone crazy. She didn't expect to run into him, as she doubted he had also lost all his powers at once. Upon opening his eyes, a handsome young man awoke, unable to take his eyes off his beloved. He was so beautiful that it took Ruse's breath away just by looking at him. Fearing the boy was an emperor's spy, the heroine ordered him to leave. But he smiled beautifully and thanked her for the rescue, despite the girl's madness. Despite his multiple fractures, he got up and began to inspect the girl's dwelling. The stranger his behavior became, the more questions arose in Rustica's mind. Why would only a madman attack two bears with a simple sword? Now the young man didn't care anymore, because they were finally together. The girl's departure had saddened him so much that now he wouldn't leave. Without reciprocating, the heroine considered their night together a mistake. The young man spent the night with her because of his affection, and now his heart was broken. Faced with this, he demanded that the girl say his name. The boy's name was Hayden Constant Rostenbuller, but Rue decided not to reveal it. Since they parted by the wall, the girl had lived there for 4 years. Since she loved that place and never left it, Hayden decided to move there too. Yesterday was his first time, and he wanted to take responsibility for it. Tired of his insistence, Rue remembered that she used to have white hair. This was due to her repeated attempts to cross the wall, now demolished. The Kaeda Empire, to which they were loyal, was no longer the only one. The girl believed it was impossible to break the wall. It was a miracle of nature. It stands so high that it is impossible to climb and is made of an unknown material. While shopping at the market, the shop owner suddenly recognized the girl. She is from Kaeda. The rumors that recently reached him from a merchant about the broken wall. He thought they were crazy. That's why the old man asked if she had been drinking at Ben's, which does have a potent drink. He is the second outsider to say that the wall has been torn down. This doesn't look good. If that were true, Ra couldn't even imagine how much the war would have intensified. It was not a time for jokes. The heroine's head was spinning, but she had no strength left. Hayden waited so long to meet the girl, but his dreams crumbled when he learned she remembered nothing. The young man couldn't even imagine what that bastard Carlos had done to her. Good thing a bear injured him. It was a perfect excuse to stay longer with Rue. At that moment, a messenger bird flew into the house, just as Hayden thought he wouldn't find her anymore. From the letter, Carlos still did not understand the gravity of the situation. Soon people would cross the gap. Then, the gentleman decided not to intervene, as he did not wish to meet that wretch again at all. It was not the time to think about the emperor. Now the most important thing was a much more valuable person, the hero of Kaeda and his savior, Rustica Jens, whom the gentleman wished to steal. Surprisingly, Hayden's wounds were healing. The bones fused at a terrifying speed and regained their color. Every time the girl started to suspect something, Hayden, with a smile, said he had regained strength thanks to the wall. It seemed his recovery suited Rue, as she chopped wood wonderfully and was not afraid of work. However, the heroine was not happy about his arrival. This was not the happy ending she dreamed of. Clearly, this guy was very suspicious, and this will not stand. With that strength and regeneration, it was obvious the army would want to recruit him. Accustomed to solitude, she never imagined feeling so lonely. A messenger from the master soon arrived. Apparently they loved the bear skins. 50 coins for each skin. How could he refuse such an offer? Upon arrival, the gentleman paid him instantly, in cash. It turns out he was also aware of the situation in the Kaeda Empire. Information verified according to him. Everything pointed to a new war about to break out. It is rumored that beyond the wall a monster king appeared. A man with black hair, incredibly beautiful. From the description, he resembles Hayden, impossible, simply impossible. The rumors about the breach in the wall were founded, but the heroine needed to verify it for herself. After deciding to go to the North Wall, Rustica prepared to return home and pack. She fled here, unable to bear the contempt of her acquaintances after losing her powers. As the young woman crossed the forest, she was very surprised to see Hayden. He recounted that they paid him for the bear skins, enough to leave somewhere. The gentleman thought leaving was a good idea, but she didn't plan on leaving. It was because of him. What this man wanted from her remained a mystery to the girl. Living in such a world was unbearable. Rustica didn't want to know any more about it. Seeing that everything was so bad, Hayden didn't understand why the young woman was so irresponsible. It was just one night, so Rue didn't attach importance to that fleeting encounter. And if they met again, the young man should just pretend not to know her. If the heroine wished it so much, Hayden was ready to give in at that instant. The master left his lady alone. They would soon meet face to face again. A strange sequence of events failed to fully fit into the heroine's mind. When Rustica returned home, Hayden had vanished as if he had never been there. Reviewing all possible options, the girl thought he was a powerful mage, able to teleport. She was barely savoring the silence when she suddenly heard the sound of footsteps. On the other side of the door, someone ordered the knight of the Kaeda Empire to come out and receive orders. Reluctantly opening the door, the young woman saw Aldwin Rochester in the doorway. He brought good news. His Majesty, the Emperor, summoned the girl to return to Kaeda. After downing an entire can of beer out of rage, Rustica flatly refused to go to the Empire. She preferred to be considered dead from drinking rather than return to the one who mocked her. The Emperor sentenced Countess Rustica to be sent to the Persetta Empire as a diplomat. And now the girl couldn't be thankful for such an opportunity, as it wasn't her dream. Since Rue was already 25, Aldwin suggested she see it as an opportunity to start a new career. There could be no political agreement when monsters were arriving on their lands from Persetta. Although the heroine found it hard to accept, the situation was not so bad in reality. Moreover, the gentleman requested to go with her as a personal guard. What have I considered? Although Rustica had no family, she didn't want to go to a barbarian country full of monsters. It turned out that His Majesty cared so much about the girl that he knew her whereabouts. Aldwin's face was unbearable, a fanatic who would always follow Carlos. And to think that before, being an imperial knight, Rustica was like this. After all, she was the one who most wanted to be behind the wall and had an incredible opportunity. After deciding, the heroine understood that she would die alone in that cabin or beyond the wall. It didn't matter. Ruse prepared quite quickly. All this time, she had lived to be able to leave at any moment. If possible, she intended to return there. After all, that was her home. For this mission, His Majesty personally gave the gentleman a teleportation stone. The power of the magic stone enveloped the heroes and opened the way to the imperial palace of Kadat. In the capital of the Kaeda Empire, in front of the gates of the Kadat Palace, Russ saw the crack for the first time. It was simply unbelievable. A huge wall was shattered. That's why the Emperor invited the first-rank knight to the throne room of the Kadat Imperial Palace. After so many years, the protagonist returned sooner than expected. Months turned into years until she finally met Carlos Arthur. The Empire had never seen anything like it. That's why the gentleman was so confused. Nobody had any idea what that country was like. So the diplomat's task is crucial. Rustica had to go there and find her people, one way or another. His Majesty also ordered her to find out how they create monsters and report back to him. The guide from the other side was already waiting for her, so they were ordered to hurry up. It turns out that, in return, Rue would only get a decent salary. What a disappointment. However, she had no choice but to do everything within her power. She was convinced that the Emperor summoned her on purpose, knowing about her parents who disappeared behind the wall. A group of diplomats from the Kaeda Empire hastily assembled to go to the Persetta Empire. It consisted of only 4 people. First, the diplomat was a former knight and genius of sword and magic, stripped of her abilities. Rustica Jens, her bodyguard and trusted man, Viscount Melvero Aldwin Rochester. The second companion, Eliza Barkova, knight of the Imperial Order and a servant to manage the house. Aldwin himself offered his candidacy, so Rue was sure they sent him to spy on her. The protagonist was impressed by Eliza's sword mastery and tracking skills. That is, she could be an assassin. Martin worked in the Imperial Palace, and he was surely one of Carlos's men. Rustica is accompanied by these people who are totally devoted to the Emperor. A terrible journey awaited her, in which she couldn't relax for a second. When all the preparations were finally complete, the Imperial Knights set off. Their objective was the Divine Fisher. They were heading to the other side of the wall. Before reaching the other country, it seemed like they were departing towards the hereafter. Alvin was ready, as he was going there in search of a better life. He had heard rumors that their representatives had already been there. The naive young man was convinced that this side offered them a truce, not to kill them. Most thought they were weakening, which is why they accepted the agreement. The typical thinking of someone who believes Kaeda is the center of the universe was obvious to Rue. Now, as ordered, the brave heroes had to enter the dark fissure. Everything was decided, so Rustica decided to enjoy the simple opportunity to cross the wall. The world hidden behind the divine wall amazed the Imperial Knights. They found themselves on a crystal bridge, heading towards the gates of another reality. That was completely different from what Alduin had seen from the other side. Everything around them could be an illusion, so Rustica asked him to be cautious when speaking. At the other end of the crystal bridge, representatives of the Persetta Empire were already waiting for them. Simon Keinberg, Palatine Count, was sent by His Majesty the Emperor of Persetta. They prepared a carriage for Lady Rustica Janus, her 2 companions, and her chambermaid. Expectations of monsters beyond the wall were shattered by the brilliant reality. In the end, the atmosphere was very calm, similar to Kaeda in many ways. The small city on the top was Persetta's fortress, the capital called Shaley. Rustica entered a totally different world, which captivated her with its beauty and expanse. Not much time passed before they reached the Shaley Imperial Palace. The Kadat Imperial Palace was no less luxurious, but this one was impressive right from the entrance. The heroine presented herself before His Majesty the Emperor, with all the nobility gathered. The son of the Persetta Empire, the great emperor was already awaiting his guest. His lordship radiated beauty and welcomed Lady Rustica to the palace. In his flawless face, it was undeniable that it was Hayden. He was one of a kind, a hole in the wall, the Persetta Empire, the great Emperor Hayden. Rustica hoped it was all a dream. That guy couldn't be in that remote place, so the girl decided she had dreamed. The Kaeda Emperor, as she imagined him, also believed it necessary to follow the path of peace and harmony. From the records, Hayden learned that Lady Rustica was from the Imperial Order of Knights, and she also mastered magic. In the Persetta Empire, magic is scarce, and its use is forbidden. It was obvious Hayden knew Rue was incapable of using magic, but he suspected someone else was hiding behind the scenes. Not him. The Hayden the protagonist met and called was sweet and smiling, and the Emperor is so noble and arrogant, they seem like different people. His Majesty sensed that the young woman found it hard to leave her home. Now in Persetta, she just had to watch out for the alcohol, which is quite strong. The Emperor enjoyed the meeting, hoping Lady Jeans would have a good time. By the way that man spoke, no doubt it was Hayden. After the meeting, Rustica returned to the carriage, and Alduin sighed in relief. Suddenly, he became curious to know when the young man found out about her appointment. After only 2 days of reflection, the gentleman volunteered to accompany her. It is likely that the girl's candidacy was considered earlier, and Alduin found out from his father. 4 days ago, Hayden appeared in an unnamed territory of the Momentum Kingdom. Apparently, the Emperor personally went to spy on the diplomat from the Kaeda Empire. Since today's matters are resolved, Alduin suggested stopping at the Kaeda Embassy. The boy thought they would be treated badly there, but everything turned out much better than he expected. And now the heroine had the brilliant idea to spread the rumor that the Persetta Emperor is inexperienced in bed. As soon as the heroes arrived at the embassy, an avalanche of work fell upon them. They won't be able to handle such a volume of work, so Alduin was tasked with hiring workers. Honestly, Rustica was surprised that the embassy provided by Persetta was so good. After writing a list of tasks and reviewing documents, all that remained was to get the money at the exchange rate. As a former knight, the girl hated the profession of diplomat from the start, and now even more so. However, if she really thought that, she wouldn't have come this far. Rusty Cagines has been loafing around for 4 years. It's time to take the reins. It turns out that determination and fighting spirit did not help at all in making everything go well. It's not easy to interact with people after so many years of isolation. An unknown young man who appeared at the most unexpected moment distracted her from her thoughts. A squadron from Kaeda arrived at the neighboring house, where the gentleman lived. He arrived here 4 years ago from the neighboring country of Nirvana, and this was his embassy. To his right was the Solstein embassy. The whole street was his. Noticing they were the first from Perseid, the gentleman assumed they exchanged money. Rustica was just about to ask where she had to go now. There was no information about Kaeda's currency, so the gentleman decided to advise her. Count Felix Keika kindly offered him his card and permission to contact him. To say goodbye, He directed the young diplomat to the bank at the end of the street. From the card, the gentleman was also an ambassador, a fad among young people in Perseit. No one imagined that the bank owner would fleece the Kaetans like this. If the emperor knew how the Kaeta ambassador was being treated, he would be furious. What can be done? In this country, they will always be seen as enemies. Anyway, they managed to exchange Kaeta gold at a bank. It was the ideal time to go to the commercial district, to a store with a long queue. Seeing the immense crowd, Rustica was intrigued by what was causing such a commotion. A newsstand was nearby, and she decided to pass the time reading a newspaper. Kaeta has an official bulletin and a newspaper, endlessly praising the emperor. Among 300 newspapers, the girl found one called Kaeta Thief Nation. The heroine couldn't help but buy the newspaper, which described a direct attack on the Kaeta Empire. A nearby gentleman scorned the third-rate magazine, favorable to the aristocrats, and that he hated. Hayden always appeared beside her so suddenly, like a thunderclap on a sunny day. However, Rustica continued pretending she didn't know him at all. They would see each other often in the future, so the emperor asked for permission to pretend he knew her. In the castle, he was very kind and attentive, although it was normal, but she felt uncomfortable. Quickly paying for the magazines, Rustica left immediately. Aldwin entered the shop a while ago, but he was not yet seen leaving. According to Hayden, everyone who entered that store lost their minds. All he asked was that she dedicate a little of her time to him. The gentleman preferred silence, but he came to speak personally with the ambassador. Addressing more important topics, he was very happy about their long-awaited meeting. Hayden noticed that they were close to Miss Jenice's companion. In that case, he ordered her to better mark the boundaries between them. Even so, the gentleman was a little worried about this supposed colleague, an assassin disguised as a knight, who would draw his sword without hesitation for the emperor, and on top of that, a servant companion with deep knowledge of poisons. Lady Jenice's companions were extremely cruel, and it is not clear if their goal is to protect her or monitor her. The emperor conducted an exhaustive investigation, but telling her that was too much for her. However, the Persetta Empire would not open its doors to enemies just like that, so there must surely be a reason. Honestly, the handsome emperor just hoped that Jenice would understand his feelings well. He sincerely wished that she would have a good time in Persetta. Those words sounded like an insinuation for the diplomat of the enemy country to switch sides. Hayden's only hope was that Jenice would understand him and wish to stay there forever. But if there was no good reason, Rustica was forced to flatly refuse. The emperor believed his motives were clear, but he seemed to be threatening her. Rue was sent there by an enemy country, and he kept extending a hand to her. But however insignificant her status, the heroine also had her pride. At that moment, Hayden's face changed, showing that he didn't care at all. A strong pressure ran through his body. The emperor's gaze made Rue tremble. She couldn't shake the feeling that Hayden could crush her with a single finger. On the way, the brave lady meditated on many outcomes, even dying with dignity. The horrible sensation of oppression disappeared instantly. Hayden had only frightened the girl. To avoid looking like a villain, the emperor apologized and promised to be more careful when speaking. He decided to strive to earn her trust, but for Rue, the fact that he thought about it was enough. To the west of Persetta, there was a place called Plage, which covered plains and mountains. The count who governed there was surnamed Janus, and perhaps Rue could find a loved one there. While Alduin waited for his turn in the store, he even thought he was going to die. When he was finally free, he noticed that Rustica was talking to someone. Before leaving, Hayden wished the girl to have fun in Shale. The emperor's presence surprised Alduin. However, there were too many indiscreet ears to talk. Rustica was going to personally inform the emperor about what they had both discussed. After a hard day in the city, a luxurious dinner with various delicacies awaited them. Martin saw nothing special in the masterpieces he prepared with his own hands. The servant would do the impossible if his young lady craved a dish of her favorites. For some reason, the heroine remembered the emperor's words and now felt uncomfortable. But Rustica couldn't help eating in front of Martin, although she decided to try only one spoonful. The soup was so delicious that it was worth dying for a meal like that. Suddenly, an assassin in a knight's mask spoke to the heroine. Rustica did not mention her meeting with the emperor and promised to write it in the report. Upon learning that events were being held in Shalia, Aldwin proposed getting ready too. In reality, the Kaeta embassy was officially considered its enemy. They would hardly be accepted. The loud noise of the protest, outside, the embassy prevented Miss Jens from sleeping for quite a while. Sincere people demanded the immediate return home of the representatives of the other country. Despite the danger, the girl went out anyway, and Aldwin arrived immediately upon hearing the noise. With so many guards, she had nothing to fear. No one could enter without being detected. She ordered the knight to get ready, as they still had to send out the invitations. It turned out that 3 invitations also arrived for them, but Rue wrinkled her face prematurely. If everything goes according to plan, the heroine will find that nobleman surnamed Jens. It seemed only a madman would send an invitation to the embassy of an enemy country. Rue ordered all letters with the imperial seal to be burned immediately. Another letter notified about a meeting of Persetta diplomats. The third letter, which interested the heroine, came from the neighboring Nerva embassy. In the letter, Ambassador Felix invited Ambassador Kaeda to have tea the day after tomorrow at 3. Rano could ignore that letter. She even asked Martin to prepare a dessert. However, that letter with the imperial seal did not leave the girl in peace. Determined to take a quick look, she opened the envelope and was horrified. Today, in the afternoon, Lady Jeans was invited to a tea party at the Persetta Imperial Palace. The diplomat from Kaeda was treated like a thief trampling on foreign land. Rustica would not be surprised if an assassin sneaked into her embassy at night. And of course, that assassin would be stronger than her current guard. The heroine did not want to leave Eliza with Martin, so she took her along. But now she hesitated. By the way, it was dangerous to go out with so many protests everywhere. And no one guarantees safety at home. Every day, a new adventure. Just as Ruth feared, they took the cake away, and now arriving empty-handed was awkward. Having lost the will to live, she decided to simply ask to be killed. The young and charming emperor organized a beautiful tea party in his palace garden. Hayden was glad the girl was settling into the embassy and offered her tea. In this, the lady was simple, although in reality she considered tea-scented hot water. In society, people are talkative, so whatever she says will spread. Rustica's country attracts a lot of attention, but she couldn't change public opinion. That sounded as if she had already been a victim of similar rumors. The girl was happy about the emperor's invitation, but she didn't understand why he had summoned her. In fact, a personal meeting with the emperor was already a great honor. Hayden sought to connect and planned to become her friend. Rue's cup remained full, indicating she didn't like the tea. Or perhaps it was all due to the place where she had to drink the tea. A wild animal roar made her turn, and she saw a huge monster. The prototype of the creature they talked about in Cald was even more terrifying. Seeing it, Rustica's blood boiled. Damn Emperor! The monster was approaching, and the heroine couldn't use magic, but it was too late to flee. The strange thing is that the Emperor didn't even flinch, so it was just a test. Looking her fears in the eyes, she could neither kill the monster nor escape. The bloodthirsty creature, with great power, overwhelmed her. It seemed like her end, just when everything seemed to end badly. A powerful magical blow stopped the monster dead in its tracks. Everything changed suddenly. The heroine appeared in a terrifying and completely different place. The emperor had already said that there was a place governed by a noble with the same surname as Rustica. It turns out they were in the farthest area of Persetta. And apparently, monsters were frequent visitors. Persetta ran out of mages. The wandering mana concentrates, and that's why the monster wave appears. If Hayden wanted to scare Miss Jeans with monsters, well, he succeeded. He finally captured the girl's attention. The gentleman wanted to know what her interests were. He felt sorry for having scared her, but it was still an impressive spectacle. That piercing gaze seemed to suppress all the heroine's emotions and instincts. The truth is that her fighting instinct had atrophied after so many years of isolation. Upon hearing that, Hayden was convinced that the Kaeda Emperor had told her. Only now did Rustica understand that the man had never threatened her. In reality, all his hostility from the beginning was directed at Carlos. Feelings acquired on the battlefield do not disappear just like that. That's what Rue thought. Even old knights retain their sharpness. To say that he lost it due to age is absurd. Rustica desperately asserted that her skills were now worse than those of a novice knight. If everything is based on her former reputation, Hayden chose the wrong path. She couldn't lift her sword anymore. However, the emperor believed it was a blatant lie, and was even ready to prove the opposite. Considering it impossible, the heroine thought this conversation was pointless. In that case, Hayden ordered her to cancel all her plans and proposed they meet tomorrow. With frequent encounters, he planned to build trust and make her believe. Soon, Jenny's left, agreeing to meet tomorrow at the same time. At that moment, the poison test was ready, and the servant brought a piece of cake. Despite the high risk, Hayden couldn't resist trying Lou's gift. According to the servant, reports were coming in about a powerful wave of monsters in the west. The master was not only aware, but he himself had to face a huge monster. The emperor only stopped the northern monster wave, but the western one will be much worse. The intrepid emperor was ready to leave at any moment. Furthermore, he ordered the magical waves detected today in Calais to be announced. Hayden burned to know about Carlos Archero Ingram and awaited his arrival. Rustica shouldn't be sitting writing a report this late at night. Originally, she was trying to find out who that nobleman surnamed Jins was. The young woman didn't want to get her hopes up about her parents, but she couldn't keep quiet about it. If there was any hope of finding her parents, who disappeared in the war 11 years ago, Rue did not want to lose her. She gets tired every day, but after what she saw today, after a long time, she felt strange. Like in those times, when the milady instinctively recognized the presence of monsters. Anxiety ran through her whole body. Sensing the same thing right now, Rustica suddenly noticed a strange energy. Magical forces enveloped the room, and at that moment, Carlos Arthur Ingram appeared. The gentleman was very interested to know how she was doing after a few days in Perset. In reality, he was not there. It was a kind of illusion. The Qaeda Emperor came out of curiosity to see how Lady Jane's was doing, an exquisite way to show his interest. Just when Rue is about to die, after pushing her to death, Carlos did not expect to hear that the young woman had discovered that the Persetta Emperor is crazy. The fact is that, from the first day of her arrival, Hayden has been convincing her to switch sides. And today, he invited the girl to tea and come closer, which aroused Carlos's interest. Rustica has been in Persetta for 3 days, but still cannot get used to it. Curiously, no protests are heard today. Soon, the protagonist arrived at the Alia Imperial Palace to visit His Highness. The gentleman ordered her to concentrate, as he was going to give a simple etiquette lesson. He had already spoken about banning magic, and yet, the Qaeda Emperor was playing with fire. Until yesterday, Rustica didn't attach importance to them not throwing stones at her window. Even more disconcerting to the Emperor was the appearance of Carlos in such casual clothes. It turns out the gentleman saw him arrive in an unbuttoned shirt and a blue robe. In his opinion, it was a lack of tact, so Hayden suggested etiquette classes to the girl. The Emperor would not yield, but this carried the risk of war between their countries. He believed he had done well enough, but they assured him otherwise. Suddenly, His Majesty became curious whether Miss Jen knew how to dance. The girl was instantly disconcerted, but one doesn't need to be noble to know how to dance. Hayden understood her curiosity, but considered it reckless. He was going to take matters into his own hands, blaming not Rustica, but the Qaeda Emperor. Despite this snub, if the lady accepts, the Emperor will pretend nothing happened before their first dance. And no less than with the Emperor, she had to take off her coat. She felt useless, but Hayden chose her to teach her. It was her decision. Even so, she couldn't help feeling nervous so close to the Persetta Emperor. Seeing his calmness, she thought she shouldn't worry and took him by the waist. He placed his hand on her shoulder, and being closer, Rue smelled his scent. Looking him in the eyes, she suddenly remembered the night they spent together. She feared making a mistake, but Hayden would endure stepping on him up to 100 times. Dancing despite the fear, Rustica stepped on the Emperor's foot. She stepped on him, but surprisingly, it was she who screamed. The shame over what happened did not allow her to continue, but the gentleman could not let her leave. If the girl regretted it, she had to stay with him, not run away again. So that Hayden wouldn't suffer from the heavy night boots, Rustica suddenly took them off, and she was left barefoot. After taking off her shoes, the Emperor lifted the girl and placed her on his feet. Upon opening the invitation from the Imperial Palace, the protagonist foresaw a slow day. And exhausting, but looking into the Emperor's eyes, she literally couldn't look away. Only now did the girl understand that, perhaps, the day would not be as long as it seemed. In a short time, Rustica learned not only the basics of dancing, but much more. It was time for a break, so Hayden invited the girl to accompany him to lunch. Today they had a boring etiquette lesson, and the next class would be about table protocol. In the end, Rustica took a little longer getting ready for lunch, but she looked absolutely stunning. Trousers on ladies of the Empire were considered in bad taste, so she had to wear what they gave her. Hayden looked at her so spellbound that it was difficult to decipher what he was really thinking. Noticing how well the dress suited Miss Jen's, the gentleman gifted it to her as a present. The sun warmed pleasantly, and the gentleman wanted to have lunch outside, but the cool air convinced him to eat inside. If Ambassador Jeans had had more time, she was sure she would have loved the tour of Shaley. Now was not the best time to look. Too many strange eyes were set on Keita. This is the perfect opportunity to deceive someone as naive as Rustica. So Haydn advised her to carefully decide whom to trust and which advice to pay attention to, what she should worry about, and what she should accept in her life. The next day, the heroine returned to the Nerva embassy, where Felix was waiting for her. It turns out that yesterday it appeared in the newspapers, saying that the emperor did horrible things to her. As a foreign correspondent, Felix knew the rumors and that the emperor could confront nobles. Settling in, Rustica wanted to know more about the emperor's mysterious personality. Haydn Rastana Belair was the emperor of the Great Persetta Empire. He was the last of the Orthodox Belair dynasty, which disappeared 430 years ago. In all that time, no heir appeared. Someone kidnapped the members and stole the treasures, and that someone was from Keita. More precisely, the Emperor of Keita, Carlos Arthur Ingram. Persetta believes that Carlos took everything from Persetta and then built a wall. Between Persetta and Keita, which were once one, there is a wall and the territory shrank. According to sources, hundreds of years have passed, and Persetta still does not recognize Keita. Almost half of Persetta's imperial titles correspond to the southern area. Today, Keita. Regarding Rustica's question about the fall of the empire, the imperial insignia was preserved. According to Felix, the nobles did not separate because they did not want to pay taxes regularly. But despite everything, Persetta is a country governed by the wise, fearsome wise men. Isolated from the world, they fiercely protect the legacy of the Persetta Empire. Living millennia, they are capable of using magic even when it has been forgotten in Persetta. Analyzing each region, in the east was the Dragon Lord, their leader. The north remains a mystery, little is known about it. And finally, in the west was the Lord of the Magic Tower, guardian of all magic and knowledge. It is rumored that a sage from the west ruled the tower before the emperor. He is now retired. The ambassador says that magic was forbidden in this country, so there cannot be people in the tower. In any case, those people will not allow the imperial mark to be removed, recognizing the emperor as the Belair heir. Probably, no noble could oppose the powerful Dragon Lord. Having an emperor is better, as the imperial mark was not removed due to the vacant throne of the ducal era. Despite his young age, the new Persetta emperor has proven to be a tough nut to crack. He immediately began clearing the northern lands of monsters, thus proving his power and influence. For 400 years, during the emperor's absence, the nobles took care of the monsters. Felix noticed that the eastern lands were the only prosperous place. Obeying the Dragon Lord, they only sent armies rarely beyond the walls of Keita. Little by little they took lands, until the emperor appeared from the north and the east. For the eastern nobles, the emperor brought fear for the first time. Many fled north, but the monsters stopped them. The emperor was cold towards the fugitives, and that was one of the reasons for the antipathy of the eastern nobles. Thus ended the subjugation of the northern monsters in the east, after only 4 battles. The emperor ignored the power and public opinion of the eastern nobles. Felix was convinced that the Persetta emperor was an enigmatic figure. His intentions were a mystery to everyone. Therefore, everyone in this country wonders why so much attention is focused on Miss James. The young woman became the main topic of conversation in Persetta, but it was not enough to intimidate her. It turned out that Felix learned from the news that the envoy from Keita had been carried out of the palace completely unconscious. The pen was mightier than the sword. All the diplomats were betting on how long Miss James would last. The gentleman bet on 1 week, but that was very mean. So, Rustica ordered him to change the bet to 2 weeks, planning for him to win. The protagonist was confident in her bet. Haydn wanted her to stay in Persetta, but it is not his will that keeps the girl here. Everything depends on what she discovers later. In search of answers to her questions, Rustica set off for the National Library of Chalet. The plans in her head changed 2 days ago, when Carlos visited her at the embassy. Then, the gentleman appeared with the proposal to appoint Miss Jeans to a new position. He chose the girl as minister of Persetta because she shared his feelings about their parents. The protagonist knew that, in his intention not to impede her search, there was a selfish motive. Recalling that Rustica wanted her reward, the emperor felt his response was confusing. That day, he promised to help find her parents and support her knight. Miss Jeans would have the opportunity to live in Calais with her parents in peace when her work was done. Carlos and Hayden were the ones who brought up the topic of her parents. Now the heroine must choose whom to trust. But first, she must make sure they are still alive. After a long search, Rustica found information on Ethan Arthur Jeans and Mylene Jeans. When she was 14, her parents disappeared without a trace behind the wall. By moving to the enemy country, they even obtained a noble title and lived in abundance. Now, the girl finds it hard to believe they had 3 more daughters. She decided that her parents had decided to erase her from their memory and start a new life in Pursuit. 11 years have passed since those horrible days when Rustica walked on the edge of a knife. Fighting in endless battles against monsters, a single goal haunted her all this time. Alone and witnessing the death of her own soul and body, the young woman swore to resist. To resist alone. As a worthy knight and daughter, she promised to tear down the wall and save her parents. But now Rustica only arrived in a foreign country as an enemy. She became an ambassador for Pursuit and lost all opportunity. Her parents deserved an honorary title, while Rue was a simpleton, barely capable of holding a sword. She was so ashamed of this that she wanted to run away, but she had nowhere to go. Whether it was Carlos or Hayden, both were good, but it made no sense for her to go through this alone. The girl's parents did not know she was there. They weren't even looking for her. These reflections ended up confusing the heroine. She didn't know what to do. The next morning, Rustica woke up a mess. She was so upset yesterday that she couldn't sleep. She didn't sleep all night and still couldn't sort out her thoughts. To be honest, the girl did not rule out that the Persetta Emperor would betray her. It had happened before. The fact that Carlos came in person with the proposal suggested he was not lying. Just when Miss Janice least expected it, a young maid approached her. This new maid, whom Martin spoke of, looked even younger than a 14-year-old girl. Rue tried to compose herself so as not to show herself in a bad light in front of the child. It turned out that Rusilla knew perfectly well that Miss James had come as an ambassador. As soon as it was known that breakfast was ready, the heroine left, saying goodbye courteously. This maid was so sweet that Rue was sure they would become friends. Seeing the girl's haggard face, the boys instantly knew she hadn't slept well. With that money, it would be better to rest, but the invitation had already been sent to the ambassador. Rustica even thought that everyone present was betting on how long she would last. Not wanting to see the envelope, the girl reluctantly opened it. This morning, she was invited to the palace. It was so unexpected. As soon as she arrived at the palace, the emperor immediately ordered her to change clothes. The girl had barely arrived, and he already made her feel miserable. Today they had an outdoor walk planned. Luckily, the trousers didn't pinch too much. Soon Hayden led the girl through the forest, but Rustica couldn't calm down. He was trying to interest her, but seeing the same expression over and over is very sad. The emperor hadn't prepared anything special. Only one person would be upset if Rue didn't remember him. The gentleman wanted the girl to meet him in person and remember him. Sensing an incredibly strong aura, the girl saw a huge monster running towards her at full speed. That feeling of fear and déjà vu made her heart beat faster. Rustica remembered it. It turned out the monster wasn't going to attack her, but landed gently on the ground. The heroine came face to face with Icarus, a huge eagle with a dog's body and gigantic wings. From the displays of affection, it was clear that she and the emperor had a very special relationship. To begin with, Hayden introduced them, but for Rue it was new to see a friendly monster. The monster, confused, hid immediately, although Rustica was the one who should have hidden. She couldn't run away, or the monster would chase her, and the emperor wouldn't be able to stop it. As the master said, it seems they will have to see each other very often in the future. In that case, the protagonist extended her hand, and the pet reluctantly allowed itself to be tamed. Of course, Icarus didn't let just anyone ride him, but Hayden suggested flying. He even offered his help, but the girl trusted her kidnapping skills. The problem is that Icarus was not a horse, but a griffin. Without realizing it, Rustica was already mounted on the huge bird. The main thing was the safety device, which should not come loose. Suddenly, someone called the emperor, and the master left the girl alone with the griffin. The situation must have been serious, for Count Simon to run to look for them. How unfair to be called to the palace so suddenly, and on top of that on a griffin. Rustica barely managed to hold on tight when the huge Icarus took off and started flapping its wings. The girl was so scared that she was desperately trying to convince the griffin to lie down again. However, at that moment Icarus spread its wings, as if about to take flight instantly. Icarus, the divine beast of the great Persetta emperor, soared over Shalia, disconcerting the envoy from Caeta. In those days, when Rustica was one of Caeta's knights, there existed a magical beast that terrified the knights. With a gigantic body and a terrifying appearance, it flew at an impossible speed to follow. Tearing people apart with its huge claws, it made everyone tremble with fear. The heroine believed, relying only on her knight instincts. It was the same creature she was riding now. The girl assumed that Icarus was venting his anger over their previous fights. She even commented that he emerged unscathed from the battle, as if the monster were mocking him. Of course, with his history of confrontations, Icarus might want to annoy or take revenge on her. However, when the griffin pushed the girl, she looked up and was wide-eyed. The beautiful landscape stretching below looked like a miracle the heroine was seeing for the first time. Apparently, Icarus only wanted to show her that, which Rue silently appreciated. After so long in the heights, the heroine felt her death coming, until a hand touched her. Lord Hayden arrived just in time, as his griffin showed no intention of landing. He didn't remember ordering Icarus to fly off with Ambassador Jens. Since the girl was clearly in shock, the emperor decided to apologize immediately. In reality, Rue feigned her shock so as not to see the articles about the fate of the Caeta consul. Sincerely regretting frightening Miss Jens, the gentleman took control of the situation. He was going to ensure the girl's safety until landing, so he ordered her to relax. Hayden's initial goal was for Rue to gradually get used to it before climbing on. But now he made the decision to descend, before the sun completely set. The sunset was really beautiful, so Rustica didn't mind staying to watch it longer. So the gentleman proposed she lean on him even more. Relaxing her body, they could look around without haste. The emperor showed Miss Jean's various places in Shale, the Mill River, where they were building a bridge, the diplomatic district where he lives, the wide streets, art museums, and similar places. But nothing she saw impressed the protagonist. Hayden was too close, the heat of his body pressed against hers, his breath mixing with his voice when he spoke, and the beating of his heart that Rustica felt on her back. Everything reminded her of that night intimacy they shared as Rue and Hayden. Rationally, the girl understood that she shouldn't have gotten so close to him, but maybe she could enjoy this warmth a little, even if just for a moment. The road Rue took from Caeta was called Bepel. Any trip across the Bepel Bridge was done by order of the emperor. For Rustica, that meant he could take her to her parents right now. Next time, Hayden promised a real tour. The sunset was worth it, but Rue was forced to refuse, settling for the idea of breaking her neck. The next day, very early, news reached Persid about a monster wave in the west. Yesterday, after leaving Miss Jenny's, the emperor said he had important matters. This made the protagonist think it was due to the monster wave in Fellas. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door and the maid brought news. It turned out to be a message from His Majesty, asking Miss Jenny's to wait for him at the embassy in half an hour. 20 minutes later, not understanding the situation, Rustica left to meet the emperor. Since she left in a hurry by his order, there was no one in front of the embassy. At that moment, the great Hayden flew towards her on a griffin and hugged her tightly. This morning was indeed fantastic, foreshadowing many interesting things. Nothing should follow yesterday's script. Miss Jeans did not want to die young. The girl looked so depressed every time they met that the emperor thought she had lost the will to live. Finally relaxing, the protagonist looked ahead, and what she saw shocked her. Flying over hundreds of knights crossing the wall, the master forced her to participate in the expedition. The kidnapping of the Caeta ambassador was only in her dreams, and she was happy to have succeeded. Right now, Miss Jins was observing Persetta's military aid from the front row. They moved so fast that Rustica couldn't even open her eyes because of the wind. After flying over Bepel, the heroes came face to face with the huge mouth of a bloodthirsty monster. While the girl dodged, fearing death, the brave Hayden split the monster in half with a single blow. Thousands of bloodsuckers flooding Persetta's territory indicated that the road would be long. Suddenly, the emperor ceded the reins to her and jumped off, brandishing a sharp sword. Death looked Rue in the face, so the emperor's taunts were irrelevant. Seeing Miss Janes so bold, Hayden was filled with a happiness that gave him power. His goal was to confront a myriad of flying creatures face to face. As long as the emperor guaranteed Rue's safety, she would accept this dangerous step. The young woman's resolve filled Hayden with enormous strength. Wielding his sword, he would finish this. A powerful magical wave, full of strength, instantly descended upon the horde of monsters. When the air cleared, Hayden ordered them to descend, and Rustica guided the griffin to the ground. Approaching the ground like a projectile, Icarus hit the ground hard. This is how the monster wave of the moor, in the northwestern region of Persetta, Fellas was suppressed. After that, the knights received the order to check the corpses and leave no one alive. In just 2 attacks, the nearest monsters were annihilated. Now the heroine understood why the previous subjugation ended after 4 battles. In theory, it seemed easy to prevent the appearance of new monsters and destroy those already created. However, if the emperor possessed such power, he could surpass Carlos. Finally, Hayden was eager to see Miss Jean's reaction from the front row. Tired of watching, Rustica just wanted to return to the embassy. The girl was more critical than expected. Moreover, she didn't understand why they had brought her there. To show the magnitude of the Persetta army and allow her to observe the monsters, Hayden took the ambassador on an excursion. At that moment, it became known that the area was being cleared, but a second wave was expected. Count Fellas and the Countess at that moment were far from the castle, leading the battle. They were always ready to receive Hayden, no matter when he decided to visit them. Since the emperor could not enter the castle in the absence of its owner, he opted to camp in Belfort. Rustica fell into the trap set for her by the Persetta emperor. In a short time, the armed Persetta army arrived safely at the camp in Belfort. Amidst all that chaos, the heroine felt extremely uncomfortable. It was too late to run away, so she followed him to the Belfort camp. But the emperor who had dragged her there paid her no attention, absorbed in a conversation. The imperial troops were busy setting up temporary tents to spend the night. Rue racked her brains, trying to understand what the emperor wanted from her. The girl was already quite annoyed, but during all that time, Icarus didn't stop bothering her. Hayden called that special treatment, but the heroine definitely didn't benefit from it at all. Still being a foreigner from an enemy state, the Empire members treated her with suspicion. Also, Rustica constantly heard about the achievements of her parents, who lived nearby. All this frustrated the girl, but she couldn't reunite with her parents in that state. Neither as a knight of Caeta, nor as a consul, she didn't know what problems her incompetence could cause them. In her current state, it was even awkward to suggest they return to Caeta together. And what the heroine feared most was that if her parents rejected her first, she truly wouldn't bear it. Upon her return, Hayden couldn't help but notice that the 2 of them had gotten along well and had grown closer. Seeing the feathers on her head, the emperor smiled and began to gently remove them. The temporary accommodation was ready, so he suggested going in. Miss Jeans was getting used to the battlefield, thanks to the adjustment the emperor provided. It turned out that now, finally, the time had come to meet her parents. Hayden assumed that Rue had already realized that Count and Countess Fellas were her parents. Rather, she already knew, but the ambassador was not happy about the long-awaited family reunion. Thinking about what his lordship would like, the emperor was unaware of how much the meeting with her parents would displease her. It was rumored that Miss Jeans was a brave and loyal knight. It seemed to the emperor that loyalty to the emperor was more important to her than the parents before her eyes. It could be a touching family reunion or a scene where the count and countess considered their daughter a disgrace. Unpredictably and childishly, the emperor provoked Miss Jeans. Unable to bear another provocation, the furious Rustica impulsively drew her sword. However, she had neither the courage nor the opportunity to confront him. That being the case, the only thing she could do was sacrifice herself. The instant the blood of the First Order knight spilled, a magical aura illuminated the Belfort camp. Worried, the knights burst into the emperor's rooms upon seeing the inert body in his arms. In a desperate attempt to save Miss Janice, Hayden ordered everyone to leave and not let anyone in. Rustica could not wield the sword and felt her whole body becoming apathetic, ignoring his orders. Nevertheless, it was a very familiar feeling of helplessness, which had not left the heroine since she lost her powers. But she didn't know if it was like that just by holding the sword she lost consciousness. Feeling as if something was forcefully controlling her, Rustica suddenly opened her eyes. With tears in his eyes, Hayden tried to understand why she did that, instead of stabbing him. He provoked her to hit him, but everything turned out completely different. In total confusion about why he was crying, the girl first wanted to know what was happening to her. Noticing that Rui saw the chains, Hayden gathered the courage to ask if it was really so. In that case, everything was fine. At least, her vision had returned completely. However, the heroine felt abnormal, clearly feeling how magic bound her body. Instinctively, she understood that she had to break them immediately, without thinking twice. Rui couldn't die when she tried, and the magic was tied to her life. But it wasn't time yet. As if proving him right, forces were once again leaving the girl's body. Rustica understood neither Hayden's words, nor the magical chains that appeared on her body. The actions of the always impeccable emperor were never questioned. In the Keita Empire, doubting the emperor is pure rebellion. But the brave Miss Janice dared to ask the great emperor, as she always did. Seeking to cross the wall to save her comrades and family, Rue wanted to end the war. In the eyes of the 20-year-old girl, Emperor Carlos did not seem interested in stopping the war. Still, the girl did not lose hope of permission to cross the wall and annihilate the barbarians and magical beasts. The adorable and novice knight, Rustica Jens, was unaware of the true nature of the emperor. Carlos valued her loyalty, but this exceeded her duties. After chaining her with magic, the master ordered her to stay in Keita and swear eternal loyalty to him. The heroine could not allow her strength to be stolen so impudently. Waking from the horror she experienced, Rustica found herself drenched in cold sweat. But upon opening her eyes and seeing the master in front of her, she understood that it was only a nightmare. Hayden ordered her not to get up yet, as she was still under the effects of the spell. Probably, the young woman will remain like this for about one more day. Carlos would never allow her death. The master agreed to stop talking about those things and explain everything if Miss Janice ate something. It had been 4 years since Ra couldn't use her power. That's when magic appeared. It is supposed that everything was the fault of a spell, which Hayden considered a curse, and exploitation. The genius Chinese sword sorceress Keita could not use her innate power. That simply couldn't be. The emerald light, symbol of all the power used by Carlos, meant that he stole all of Rustica Jens's power. In yesterday's conversation, she understood that Hayden's provocations sought to awaken her abilities. Since then, changes were occurring in the protagonist, revealing them little by little. Upon awakening her vision, she could see the immense mana causing the monster wave. For this reason, the emperor was tied to this place, following her ceaselessly. Rune couldn't see these things for 4 years and wasted her youth blaming herself. People usually deny it for more than a week, but the heroine got over it quickly. And she hated Carlos. Over the last 4 years, she had enough time for denial. One of Hayden's goals was to reclaim the territory, power, and magic that Carlos stole from Keita. Surprisingly, now Rue's intentions had changed, and she had a new goal. She was going to kill Carlos and would allow the emperor to join. It's not that Hayden didn't want to. He simply feared falling in love with her again. So, since the gentleman is in love, Rustica asked him to help her get revenge. It was so unfair that the girl was going to use the only one who had loved her to become the sword of the ruthless and cruel consul Jeans. The emperor wanted something in return. Surprisingly, the gentleman first wanted to meet her parents. Besides, no one will be able to stop parents who only live with the desire to meet their daughter. After those words, all the anguish and worries that Rue had accumulated here vanished. In a short time, the emperor flew away, promising to return, leaving the girl to rest. At that moment, she witnessed a knight trying to stop an intruding carriage. Charlotte Melmew, daughter of Baron Gromby, brought some food for the imperial troops protecting the empire. This lady chose an inopportune moment, as access to the area was forbidden to outsiders. Suddenly, a gallop echoed and another carriage appeared at the entrance. Lady Charlotte was ordered to return immediately, as the young woman declared that delivering the shipment to the camp was Feliz's duty. And His Majesty is very busy. No outsider could enter the heart of Belfort. It seemed that Charlotte despised imperial law. In that case, the furious Lady Melmew pointed out Miss Janaise as an intruder. The ambassador from Keita was a guest of His Majesty. Rumors about him were already spreading. When Rustica least expected it, a flock of bloodthirsty monsters appeared in the sky. Apparently, the small creatures had separated from the main group and did not cause much fear. However, although the flock was small, there were huge specimens among them. Her courage allowed the heroine to attack without hesitation and subdue the terrible monster. Her eyes, trained by the battlefield, finally returned. Although her body is not the same, she can control it by reading the movements. Anticipating the monster's attack, the brave lady dodged and counterattacked. Ruz knew her weapon wouldn't last, but not that it would break so quickly. To save the situation, she took the sword of an imperial knight and got ready. Before the final blow, the warrior ordered the children to close their eyes. Fortunately, Everything went well, and the monster attack was repelled. The young women witnessed the horror, an image etched in their memory. Seeing their fear, Rustica couldn't ignore it and decided to give them support. She couldn't comfort the children, but she couldn't stand seeing their tears. Now, feeling the warmth of those little ones, everything was fine. His Majesty returned right at the end of the event, finishing his business. He noticed that, standing side by side, the girls really looked alike. Apparently, it is true that like father, like son. Looking at them, Rustica felt something familiar, as if they were bound by destiny. Je and Bella greatly missed their older sister. A week after arriving in Persetta, the heroine met her sisters, whose existence she was completely unaware of. Je shouldn't have come here, but the news that Lady Charlotte would come forced her to do so. And Bella also wanted to see her older sister. That's why Je couldn't come alone. Hayden said that Je wanted to meet her sister, and she had to stop Lady Charlotte. With great care, the gentleman cleaned Rustica's face after the fight. She yielded, having nothing to say. The magic in her eyes had faded, as if dissipated during the battle. What a tragedy. The spell in the eyes was simple, and the Emperor helped her, but with the rest of the enchantments. Impossible. The heroine grew up alone until she was 14, and suddenly she met her little sisters. Honestly, she was a little in shock, worried about her mother's health. What a dilemma. Je really wanted Rue to go home with them, sure that they would live together. Hope is palpable. Nothing could be certain yet, but Rustica couldn't lie to the girls. The truth always comes out. However, her godfather stated that precisely for this reason, he had brought Miss Jeans there. What a revelation. The young woman was happy to meet her sisters, but she still struggled to think clearly. Total confusion. Her face revealed that something very different was actually worrying her. What mystery is hidden behind that mask? According to Hayden, wherever the Count and Countess went, they always prepared a room for Rustica. They said their adult daughter needed her own space, worrying about their reunion. Just like Rue, both parents and daughter were very anxious, and that frustrated those watching from the outside a lot. Now the protagonist won't be able to restrain herself, being in Count Fella's lands. Unexpectedly, the news arrived that Countess Malène Jins requested permission to teleport to Belfort. Rustica needed time to prepare. However, Hayden assured that everything would be fine. The magical teleporter opened, and the lady came out of it, surprisingly resembling her daughter. There is no doubt that is Rustica's mother, Countess Fella's, the Iron Lady Malène Jins. Seeing their mother, the girls ran towards her crying inconsolably. Mom, that word the protagonist hadn't spoken in so long. The man she dreamed of seeing so much. He was right there, within reach. But even knowing it, the girl was not able to take a step forward. From experience, Hayden knew that Miss Jeans had a habit of running away. But now, he didn't think she really needed to do anything like that. Facing her deepest fears, this was the beginning of the revenge, where Rue had to act. Ahead was a path that the protagonist had to travel. Without wanting to be forever, the failed Rustica. Determined to no longer be so, the intrepid young woman took a step forward, towards her destiny. The first thing she did upon seeing her mother was tell her she had met her older sister. At that moment, Countess Fellas held her breath upon seeing her daughter in front of her, already a grown woman. Their feet carried them towards each other without thinking, finally uniting after years of distance. Maternal love bound mother and daughter with unbreakable bonds. Their connection was more than kinship. It was a reunion of mother and daughter, both feeling anguish for the same reason. A painful reunion, like the time apart, but at the same time, a fervent reunion. A week after being named consul and arriving in Persetta, Ruth reunited with her mother and sisters, but with her mother at the very epicenter of the war, they couldn't spend much time together. It seems that now Rustica only had a crucial decision to make, her family whom she had longed for so much, and for which she had suffered 4 years of torment due to Carlos's curse. And now she knew for sure where she should go. Upon the heroine's return, Hayden proposed they eat together in silence immediately. She was happy about meeting her mother and having sisters, although it was too much. Rustica wanted to know what her parents promised in exchange for bringing her here. However, Hayden didn't bring her to ask favors of the Count and Countess. Being a less petty emperor than Carlos, Hayden didn't expect anything in return. According to him, the Count and Countess would be busy, and this fortress too in the center. Monster waves in the north are regular, but in the west there were large waves after years of accumulation. For the safety of the children, Hayden planned for this monster wave to be difficult to handle. If the emperor deals with the waves poorly, the nobles will think they are at his level, and they will be quiet. Rustica was delighted that the gentleman took into account the people who were the foundation of the country. For her, such obvious things seemed strange under Carlos's influence. The Count and Countess, who arrived 11 years ago, were now crucial. The heroine had to choose Ambassador of Jinns or Lady Felaza Rustica. She never imagined that here she would be Baroness Furley and Countess of Felaza. The heroine's fate was sealed. The Count and Countess decided. The little house in Kayet is no comparison to what the Emperor found. It was normal to feel uncomfortable with the woman who saw the Emperor as a nuisance, because in reality, this was the first time for Lord Hayden. Putting that aside, Rustica wanted to know what she would do if she stayed in Perset. The gentleman was ready to return what Carlos stole from her. Revenge included decapitation, but Rue only wanted to undo the curse and recover her power as a magic knight. A curse so subtly crafted could be lethal if handled carelessly. The curse was cleverly linked to all her organs, meaning she could die. The eyes were the starting point of the curse, so it was also easy to remove. After all, Rue had looked into Emperor Carlos's eyes many times before arriving in Persetta. Hayden was convinced that history would repeat itself if Carlos found out that Miss Jeans had lifted the curse and returned. However, the master could now lift the curse from those parts of the body that were far from vital points. It was the only chance to force the young lady to stay in Persetta. The legs were farther from the important points than the arms, so it was better to free them. Before removing the curse completely, it was necessary to weaken it. With his unusual power, he managed to weaken the curse, and Rue, with her own eyes, saw the chain breaking. The leg definitely felt lighter. The girl felt so free that she wanted to break all her chains immediately. It turned out that the curse on the neck, heart, and head would require much more effort before it could be removed. The Emperor was going to free the right leg when Miss Jens finished eating. Only one leg was freed, but at that moment the heroine understood something extremely important. For her freedom, she was sure that being with Haydn was absolutely the right path. Thanks to Rustica's concentration, the gentleman managed to remove the curse from the other leg as well. Haydn planned to quickly finish his business in Fellas and then return to Shalia. By deciding to stay in Fellas, Rustica wanted to be with her parents after leaving her post. In that case, His Majesty promised to do everything possible for her resignation. The girl spoke clumsily about her reliability, which His Highness had mentioned before. She referred to how she seduced him to have a wonderful night together. Hayden understood perfectly when it was said that they should pretend nothing had happened. They shouldn't disclose it publicly, but the Lord couldn't act as if everything had vanished. The Emperor kept his word, and everything remained secret, and he intended to keep it that way. But between them, he couldn't pretend nothing had happened. Whenever Rustica saw him, he wanted her to remember that night, because Hayden always remembered her. And that was something she simply had to accept. Her warmth, tenderness, the sweet look of that night, he treated her so softly that the girl couldn't refuse. And that is another reason why Miss Jans feared looking him in the eye, afraid of giving in to temptation. Honestly, Hayden didn't want to force anything on her. But if he leaves it as it is, she will always see him only as the Emperor. And that was his greatest fear. From the beginning, he didn't want that at all. Hayden left and returned, annihilating only the monsters with his devastating power. He has nothing left to do in Belfort, and Rustica decides to return to her children. She should be happy to reunite with her family. But now something worries her more. Hayden occupies all the space in her thoughts, perhaps because it was her first time. With those thoughts, the way home isn't that long, and soon she arrives at the palace. In the courtyard, her father receives her, who has anxiously awaited this reunion. This is how Miss Janice reunites with the family she had lost. Although Hayden took good care of Rue during her stay in Shale, today was not easy for her. She probably didn't feel well at the embassy. It is understandable that she fainted. The Count was grateful that Hayden returned their daughter to them. He did not regret leaving him for a week. A week of waiting was nothing if it meant a father would see his daughter again. Lord Hayden was leaving Belfort in a bit of a hurry, so the schedule is already tight. He mentioned that today he only managed to remove Rue's curse in 3 specific spots. It was directly tied to her life, also to prevent her from finishing it recklessly. But the Emperor took full responsibility for removing the curse completely. The funny thing is that the girl herself asked him to remove the curse so she could deal with Carlos. Also, as soon as the suppression ends, there will be a victory celebration in Shaley. And then, Count Jeans received an offer to officially present his daughter. Rue arrived here as the ambassador of Qaeda, a great stigma in high society. But Hayden ordered her to follow his instructions, promising to accompany her to the banquet. At the victory celebration for the achievements of the Gens house, the emperor will declare himself partner of Lady Falaza Rustica. The count was sure that if he presented his daughter now, society would tear her apart. In his anger, Ethan rushed too much, so Mylan tried to calm him with all her might. But paternal instincts told him that Hayden looked at his daughter in a special way. In reality, Rue was 25 years old. She was an independent person, not a child. Her father found it hard to accept that she no longer needed to sew uniforms or buy swords. Like before, now the parents' task was just to support her, so she wouldn't obsess over removing the curse. And revenge. Ethan wanted to be by her side to make up for lost time and didn't want her to marry. A short time later, Rustica woke up, completely disoriented. The first thing the maid did was offer her a glass of water. After the talk with her father, the girl fainted while crying, but she supposed she hadn't been unconscious for long. The sun was still shining. First, Rue went to the bathroom to wash off all the dirt from the previous day. Lady Mylan even prepared outfits of all kinds for her daughter. The dresses were extravagant, but Rustica shared her mother's taste. She chose a light white dress with blue ruffles that enhanced her reddish hair. Everything in the palace was so huge that she barely found the staircase. Going down, the young woman unexpectedly ran into the emperor himself. Delighted by her beauty, the master was now glad he had waited for her, seeing her so beautiful before anyone else. He was so mesmerized by her loveliness that he almost forgot to ask how she was doing. Now Rue felt so relieved that her legs felt heavy, as if she had lost her balance. Just as Hayden was about to invite her to dinner, the young woman saw her father behind her, and she ran towards him. Rustica loved the dress her mother had chosen, and she let her father know. The count turned out to be much more perceptive than Hayden had imagined. Thus began the celebration for the fortunate return of the count's eldest daughter. At the table, Hayden declared that Lady Rustica had decided to move to Persetta, and he could not allow her to live on that estate. She was a skilled knight in Cald, and it would be foolish to waste such a valuable asset in Persetta. The count was very grateful to him for seeing the potential in his daughter, and he had no intention of keeping her at home. Suspecting this, the emperor decided to visit the magical tower in the morning. He was going to travel discreetly, just with Rue, leaving everything else to her parents. Originally, the Western Magical Tower was where Persetta mages learned and researched magic, but hundreds of years ago, during a kidnapping incident, the magic and powers of the Tower Master were stolen. And the culprit of this crime was none other than the Emperor of Caeta, Carlos Arthur Ingram. During this incident, the Tower Mistress suffered serious injuries, and all her students were killed. As a result, the mistress of the magic tower ceded her position to the emperor and went to live alone in the destroyed tower. All this led to rumors that the tower has been empty for hundreds of years, and intruders would be cursed. However, the appearance of the guardian at Hayden's coronation dispelled the unfounded rumors. After flying a considerable distance, the protagonists could already make out the magical tower. Below lay the remains of the neighboring houses and the ruins of the adjacent buildings. According to the emperor, the current owner of the magical tower had no intention of rebuilding them. It hurt her to see her valuable research being destroyed. That's why she hadn't left the tower for centuries. The emperor partially wanted her consent to restore the tower and check how she was doing. Rustica was an heir of Fellas, and one man destroyed both, although they were very different. When the monster wave stabilizes and the noble family gains a foothold, people will start arriving. The heroine was sure that the count would find it difficult to govern such a vast state, and he would need help. As they approached, the tower emitted a positive signal welcoming them. Fortunately, Icarus descended slowly and achieved a perfect landing. The appearance of the Lord took them by surprise, suddenly interrupting the emperor. After emerging from the bushes, Sir Roderick hastily declared that the magical tower was too big. Sir Roderick Callahan was a mage and was currently helping the owner of the magical tower. Seeing Miss Janice, the young man couldn't believe he had found the famous defender of Qatar. Since he knew that nickname, Runno struggled to guess that she was a member of the Imperial Knights. Roderick was a second-class knight in the Imperial Order, and for him, it was an honor to meet the Knight of Caeta. However, he didn't expect the Consul of Caeta, whom he was expecting, to also be Lady Janice. But now Rustica didn't want to do anything that remotely benefited Caeta. According to Roderick, there are still many people here who cannot forget their past in Keita, and they want to return. However, most of the materials had been lost, so the mages of Keita left disappointed. To begin with, the heroes entered a magical teleportation circle that led to the upper floors. All this was new to Rue, but she was ready to teleport upstairs. Just before meeting the tower owner, Hayden suddenly left and asked her to wait. To avoid wasting time, the heroine asked Roderick to tell her the history of Persetta and its guardians. He knew that, originally, Persetta and Keita were one country, with 5 guardians. These wise men protected each region. The Dragon Lord was the Lord of the Dragons, the Western one was the Lord of the Tower, and the central ruler, from the beginning, was traditionally the Emperor of Persetta. In recent centuries, because of Carlos Ingram, some guardian posts became vacant. After proclaiming himself emperor, he killed the emperor and wiped out the royal family, interrupting the lineage of the guardians. The Dragon Lord rebelled and exiled Carlos, leaving the throne vacant, awaiting the return of the guardians. Afterwards, Carlos returned to the conquered lands, and a barrier was raised. Thus the Empire of Keita was born. As for the last guardian, the one from the south, she was Lady Rustica. Carlos, the founder of the Keita Empire, was a southerner wise man, but he built it based on theft, murders and thefts, and she was born surrounded by a barrier, protected with her own life. Without even knowing it, these are lands created through theft and born amidst a barrier. Rustica couldn't believe that the story of how Carlos stole everything and raised the barrier was true. Upon arriving in Persetta, the young woman heard that Carlos had raised a wall, but she took it as a rumor. Honestly, she already doubted the Lord's actions, even in Keita, and all because the barrier was Carlos's protection, something she would never cross. Now the reason why Miss Jens was exiled from Keita was clear. In her youth, Ruse dared to ask the Emperor to cross the wall, and she was stripped of her powers. Exiled, and she lost everything. Now everything was clear. She was not to blame for any of her misfortunes. It was simple bad luck, truly dreadful luck. Soon, Hayden gave Miss Janice permission to enter, and she had the opportunity to meet the tower owner. The Emperor introduced Ophelia Quintoletta Alicia, the guardian of the tower, who had transferred control to him. Rustica introduced herself with such modesty that it was chivalrous. Offering the young woman a cup of tea, Ophelia noticed that Carlos had become more scrupulous. At that moment, the Western guardian touched her head, and the heroine felt the magical chains upon her. It was quite terrifying. Carlos used Ophelia's abilities well after snatching them away. It was truly horrible and disgusting, so much so that Rudd didn't even want to look at him. The time came for Ophelia to return to the wise man's post. Hayden ascended the throne, the barrier opened, and Lady Rustica returned to Persetta. Like it or not, the world had changed radically. If it was an offer to return to her post, the lady flatly refused. The reason was that she had been exhausted and powerless for a long time. The same thing is happening to Lady Rustica now, which is why she fled. Even if Ophelia fled, nothing would change, so she waited silently for her death. As for Miss Janice, if there was a chance, she planned to take it. According to the Western Guardian, removing the curse would take a long time, and there was a possibility of never eliminating it. However, as long as Ruth had a hand to hold the sword and strength to soften it, it was enough for her. Then the lady understood everything. That was the path His Majesty had chosen. Unable to hide her situation any longer, Ophelia Quintalet proposed inspecting the tower. The magic tower was completely empty, the work of Carlos Ingram. He stole all the invaluable magical books, ancient texts, and research, and burned everything else. The place remained abandoned until the lady's disciples ordered it. Furthermore, other artifacts were taken besides the books. Carlos took everything from here to build his empire, and he still does, using the power of the Western wise man. Emperor Keita not only cast a curse, but also depleted their strengths. The defenseless Ophelia Quintoletta and Rustica genes were used by him. The scars, accumulated over a long period of use, were deeply embedded in this space. There were countless important artifacts here. Izar's sword, Nananki's staff, Belen's necklace. Suddenly, Rustica asked to be allowed to return to the embassy. She was going to show that petty thief what it feels like to be robbed. Consul Jens returned to the Keita embassy 3 days after the theft. She needed to return to Keita urgently, so she asked Aldwin for help. Rue had to immediately inform the emperor about the situation. It concerned the Persetta army. It was difficult to explain in detail, but she had to return immediately to report. If the Emperor of Persetta finds out that she knows everything, the irreparable will happen. In the end, Aldwin decided to help, eliminating any risk of them tracking her. He gave her a magic stone, created by the Emperor of Keada. Security guaranteed. Using teleportation, Rustica left Persetta in the hands of the young man and departed. The heroine teleported so suddenly that she scared everyone with her presence. But Hayden's image continued to torment her behind her back. His ideal type of woman is one who plots revenge in secret. They shouldn't be discovered, so Rue begged him not to say anything. Rustica Jeans made a declaration, requesting an audience with His Majesty. Upon seeing the girl's unexpected return, Carlos assumed she discovered the secrets of Persetta. In recent days, being close to the Emperor of Persetta, she discovered several secrets. First, the magnitude of his Western knights and troops under the Emperor's command was much greater. They all flew on creatures resembling magical monsters, and their number was countless. The aristocrats are only interested in maintaining their own status and expanding their territories. They are used to the Emperor's absence since their birth, so Carlos was sure of it. And another secret that Rustica discovered was what the Emperor revealed to her. According to Hayden, a new guardian has emerged in the south. Then, the Emperor ordered the young woman to return in 4 hours, giving her time to rest comfortably. She feared that Carlos would notice that some of the curses had dissipated, but everything went well. It was probably because Hayden cast an illusion spell on Miss Jens before she came here. There were no guards, so Rustica decided to seize the moment to sneak away. But at the worst moment, a knight followed her, so they ended up going together. Carlos acted faster than expected and ordered his men to activate the magical circle. Since Carlos wasn't there, the protagonist also decided to start acting. While the knight was crawling slowly behind her, Rustica suddenly turned the corner. And just as he went after her to stop her, the brave one landed a punch in his face. Hayden, who suddenly appeared, was surprised to see her rummaging through the poor guy's belongings. The girl stripped the gentleman and ordered the Emperor to change clothes. Since he decided not only to observe, it would be best to disguise himself as someone from Keada. Now she had to cover her body and legs, in addition to hiding her face so as not to attract attention. They could be in danger at any moment. So it was good that Hayden protected her. While the owner is away, they must recover what was stolen and completely destroy his house. It turned out that the entrance to the archive with secret knowledge was heavily guarded, but Rustica's skills were still magnificent, so she handled the guard with cunning. Inside the archive, there were usually guards everywhere, so the heroes decided to hide. There were no guards at the entrance, so Rue decided to go around the perimeter and infiltrate. Seeing 2 guards, the girl knew she only had one chance. First, she liquidated one, stabbing him sharply in the chest. Without wasting time, Rustica lunged at the mage to complete her plan. She missed the first blow, so she had to finish him on the second attempt. The noise attracted unnecessary attention, and she could have done it silently. She couldn't stay, so she decided to lure the guards inside and deal with them. The guards were persistent, and Rustica found herself alone against 6 warriors. Before she could devise a plan, a devastating attack from outside eliminated one. Everything was very fast, he simply couldn't hold back. Hayden's blood boiled seeing his beloved surrounded by so many men. That was the trigger, the precise moment when the Imperial Guard pounced on them. In the middle of the rustic attack, to her misfortune, she dropped her sword and was defenseless. Meanwhile, on the other side of the hall, and with Hayden distracted, a knight attacked him by surprise. Fortunately, the heroine found an improvised weapon and protected the Emperor of Persetta. Without even suspecting it, Rue's junk generated a shockwave that knocked down the Imperial Guard. The young woman only picked up a staff that lay nearby, but it turned out to be more powerful than she imagined. Now, she struggled to believe that this object had taken care of all the guards. And even though it did, Hayden never asked her to protect him at all. Being a former knight, Rustica felt the duty and loyalty to protect him. The Emperor looked at the young woman with such passion, realizing that he had fallen in love again. But now his main task was to find the artifacts, which seemed identical. The scepter that Rue found was the most valuable there, and it had a special name. When they finally gathered all the artifacts, the Emperor suddenly heard a noise outside. Judging by the noise, it seemed they would be discovered soon. There was no time to talk, so Rustica decided to get them out of there as quickly as possible. Behind one of the walls in the palace corridor, there must be a place to hide. Applying a simple strike with the scepter, the young woman managed to open the entrance to a secret place. They were safe there, so the heroine suggested taking a breath before moving on. He saw Carlos come out of there once, and thus realized that there was something behind the wall. But looking around, she couldn't understand what they were seeing. The secret chamber was full of torture instruments, covered in blood. One could only imagine what Carlos did there. But the most horrific thing, what shocked the heroes, were huge containers with children inside. Seeing a small, tortured, and crippled body, Rue couldn't believe a human was capable of such a thing. In the name of the Persetta Empire, Hayden expressed his deepest gratitude. Thanks to Miss Jenny's, they managed to find the long-missing members of the royal family. What the Empress was witnessing now was the most terrible and shameful event in Persetta's history, and also the most intense humiliation, a feeling that is impossible to shake off. When others learned what happened, they could barely believe such a thing was possible. With a joint effort, Hayden and Rustica found the long-missing ones. They are the remaining children. Unfortunately, they couldn't find the others. Of the 47 missing persons, only 5 children returned as corpses. Better said, not 5, but 6, including Hayden, who returned alive. Their funerals will be organized later. And in the meantime, the Lord proposed looking at the artifacts. Rustica failed to find the imperial crown, but she did manage to get the scepter. It is a magnificent treasure, with which several of Rue's curses can be lifted. And besides, Miss Jens brought a belt. She didn't know what it was, but it was kept next to the scepter. With tears in her eyes, Lady Ophelia grabbed the belt and clutched it tightly to herself. Closing her eyes, the force emanating from the treasure was consuming Carlos's curse. Determined to seize the opportunity to break a curse, Hayden got to work. It was unthinkable. Ophelia was being consumed by a magic capable of saving her. After a while, the green tail finally reacted, and Ophelia improved noticeably. Finally, one of the curses that had bound the Guardian for years was eliminated. The treasure that Ophelia cherished so much was called the Western Sky Star, the symbol of her power. Carlos used the power of the scepter and the Western Sky Star to curse the Guardian. That is why Hayden could break the curse, under the influence of the Western Sky Star. In addition, Rustica took a spherical artifact, a pearl necklace, and a ring from there. In their day, they were symbols of Carlos, but by stealing the Emperor's symbols, he no longer needed them. Renouncing all artifacts, Lady Rustica left to present her resignation. Bowing, only Hayden and Ophelia knew that, in reality, the artifacts belonged to Miss Jenny's. When Hayden wanted to destroy them, a sinister sound suddenly sprang from the pearl. That sound meant that Carlos had realized his treasures disappeared. And apparently, he already found the culprit who dared to deceive him in that way. Without wasting time, the protagonist did not hesitate to write to the Emperor asking for her resignation. She believed it would be accepted, as she didn't write a single word that insulted him. Although it was little, her body felt lighter after the curse dissipated. The ability to move and wield a sword gave hope to the young warrior. She decided to return to Fellas the next day, when suddenly she felt a presence behind her. The surprise paralyzed Rustica, who could not escape. Someone grabbed her tightly. No one dared to deceive the great Emperor Kaeta, and now his fury was uncontainable. In his anger, he squeezed the young woman's neck tighter, lifting her off the ground. At that moment, a magical force wrapped around the Emperor like a rope, curbing his momentum. The Lord was powerfully thrown away, and Rustica fell to the ground. The cunning savior knew that Emperor Kaeta is obsessed with his own honor. Hayden was disappointed that Carlos had neither honor nor dignity. Threatening and harassing a bound knight was not part of the Emperor's honor. But according to Carlos, that was better than what Hayden did, bursting in like a thief. Thanks to Hayden, his knight behaved improperly. But the Lord still ignored much about Lady Rustica. Precisely because of Emperor Kaeta's misunderstanding, he could not become Emperor of Persetta. Ophelia could not miss the moment when fate punished the great imbecile. Carlos Ingram. Carlos believed she would remain locked up forever in that dump, crawling miserably. But Ophelia could walk and planned to make the Cretan regret it, since he didn't even know how to use the stolen power. It was not strange that everyone who had served him unknowingly turned their backs on him upon arriving here. Carlos believed the reason was that those insignificant ones fed them absurd stories. However, he tried to blame them. When he himself suspected Lady Rustica as soon as she appeared, a chill ran down his body at the mere thought of Lady Rustica choosing Persetta. And its Emperor, not Carlos. He couldn't believe it was true. He thought the girl wouldn't be capable of doing something like that. His desperate tone and reaction seemed like that of someone betrayed by the one they trusted most. Seeing Emperor Kayeda like that was disgustingly vile. Not once did he think about the pain and disappointment Ru suffered under his command. The protagonist was just a piece, and seeing how she acted as if it hurt him was disgusting. Carlos was convinced that Hayden was threatening his knight. But in reality, he helped Ru, allowed her to see her parents, and gave her a title. And most importantly, he is gradually lifting the curse Carlos placed on her. She was sure that if he had wanted to, he would have done it long ago. Rustica threw the letter in his face. That is why no one from Kayeda decided to return. No one wanted to recognize a thief as emperor. These accusations affected the gentleman so much that he immediately subjected the girl to the attack of his magical power. According to Ophelia, if the girl resists any further, her body will not withstand it. Hayden took action, ordering Ophelia to cast the elimination spell. He wanted to end that conversation. He proposed to Carlos to cross the barrier again and steal everything again if he was not happy. And furthermore, he had to collect her resignation before leaving, something he would not forgive anyone for. The ruthless Emperor Kayeda vanished. And with him, finally, silence reigned in the room. For the first time, Rustica finally challenged the emperor she had served. His words clearly disturbed him, and in the end, he was driven out in disgrace. His facial expression in the last moment was undoubtedly his first victory over him. The heroine finally defeated her master, who had chained and deceived her. The resounding victory turned into the other side of the coin for the young Miss Jeans. Her neck wound from Carlos's hands was quite severe. Healing will take time, and in the meantime, she will have to treat herself with medicine. Rustica didn't intervene much, it was her business, but Hayden remained furious. He was simply very worried that she would suffer, and he would be late. The blame fell on his shoulders, as he considered himself the one who should protect Miss Jeans. It would be much better if the girl could defend herself alone, but for now she is under his protection. To tell the truth, Hayden saw in her a determination capable of giving her the strength to decapitate Carlos personally. He had never seen such a resignation. Ru burned with desire for revenge against Carlos. Having made a decision, whatever happens, Hayden planned to get rid of the curse placed on her. Since part of Ophelia's curses were lifted, Milady could also remove hers. However, considering her current situation, this will be difficult. Carlos hit a vital point, in shock. Rano could test herself. The emperor wasn't just worried, many things troubled him, but not like this. However, the girl was one of those who moved forward without losing a second. But the Lord also had no time for slow chats. Her heart raced, her words hit hard, and the heroine struggled to calm her insides. The emperor's words were sincere, without a trace of a joke. Rustica felt the depth of his meaning, although it wasn't just because of the words. Even before, she felt everything that was happening with just a touch. How much does Hayden care? How much does he regret not being able to protect her? How much does he value her? He no longer hides his emotions, which were becoming impossible to ignore. Brazen expressions that blur what they should maintain. The heroine knew it, but couldn't look him in the eye. Because as long as Carlos's green shadow pursues her, she will feel like she is using Hayden's emotions. She needed to borrow his strength until the curse was broken. In the end, it's just unrequited affection that she won't be able to return. Late at night, Hayden went to see Ophelia to know how she was doing. That he came at such an hour made it clear to the lady that he needed something. Tomorrow, before leaving the tower, he wanted to remove part of Rustica's curse. And he needed help. Not fully recovered, Ophelia suggested he ask the Dragon Lord for help. Nevertheless, even a little help from the Western Guardian would suffice for Hayden. The artifacts will not help against Rustica's curses, imposed with power accumulated over centuries. That meant that, after leaving the wise man's post, Carlos used the power of every newborn heir. The heirs of the Southern Guardian, whom they could never find, must have been born, and died there. This continued until Lady Rustica appeared in Perseid. With warmth and longing, Hayden remembered how he met her. She found him herself. When the Lord was still a foolish child and a clumsy warrior, Rustica, like the sun, illuminated his life. The great betrayal and theft by Carlos in the past occurred hundreds of years ago. This happened over 7 years, during which he plundered the imperial treasures and the riches of the magical tower. Furthermore, he eliminated the adult members of the royalty and kidnapped the young royal members. As a result, 47 royal children disappeared. 430 years later, only 5 of them returned as corpses, and among them, a single survivor, Haydn Constant Rastana Beller. The entire empire honored the memory of Albert Judric Beller, Lady Rosen Beller, son and daughter of the Duke of Lemberg. When ashes and shadows covered the White City, the sun and the moon wept. Louisa Olga Leslie, daughter of Count Mael, Clarissa Turamagnus, daughter of Duke Ghislaine, Richard Alexander Beller, son of the great Duke Belua. All of them fled forever. Seeing the golden hair of these children brought Rustica vague memories of Hayden. A boy with a pale face and dirty golden hair, irregularly cut, looked at her with dead eyes. Now, this boy says goodbye to all the missing ones in the name of the last survivor. The heroine didn't know where he had been or what he had done until his golden hair turned black. Along with the curiosity in her soul, Rue felt pity for him. When 5 children's corpses returned, the empire shuddered and Hayden decided to end the conquest as quickly as possible. Now, Sir Simon ran through the city as if his feet were on fire. Hayden should have checked on the girl this morning, but he was a little late. So, the master told her about his plans to lift the curses in the near future. However, Ophelia was sure that it was dangerous to lift the curses related to the head still. Lifting too many or too few curses might not go very well. Carlos tied the girl up securely, to such an extent that Ophelia wondered how she would behave when they removed everything. I'm glad to see Miss Jean's full of energy. The guardian decided to remove some curses from her. As soon as Hayden held Rue tighter, the lady began to read the magical spell of renunciation. The curse was intertwined in her tendons and bones. The closer to the heart, the harder it was to remove. With every fiber of her being, Ophelia fought against those infernal knots, rooted to the girl. By pushing her power to the maximum, Rustica felt unbearable pain running through her entire being. Luckily, it all ended in an instant, and the girl was well again. The curse around the eyes was loose, and the legs at the end of the body made it lighter. As Ophelia said, the closer it gets to the heart, the tighter it grips. That's why they had to recover the power Carlos stole, to eliminate it once and for all. It hadn't been a month since they reunited, and they had already done so many things together. The heroes just had to move forward together. From now on, Hayden promised to be by her side. A strange feeling invaded the heroine. Her body had lost balance. Depending on how her body responds, her strategy will change. Hayden offered to help, so they could go to the next ball together. As the daughter of Count Fellas, Rustica had to mingle with high society. The emperor didn't plan to name her a knight yet, although she would love that. Lately, the heroine has been busy breaking the curse, so revenge is her priority. But if Rue keeps thinking about that bastard, there won't be room left for Hayden. Her constant thoughts about Carlos hurt the master's heart. Hatred and affection are 2 sides of the same coin. Despite her convictions, Rustica was not going to the ball. She needed time to break the curse. It was too early to join the Imperials. A long road awaited her. In reality, the emperor was willing to help the girl take revenge and join the Imperials. But in that case, he wanted the damsel to look at him, and he was even willing to undress. It seems the emperor will go to the ball alone, and he won't be able to marry after losing his purity. But Rustica rejected him and told him to look for a better lady than herself. Those words did not push Hayden away, they only spurred him to hug her tighter. The master waited for her for so long, remembering her smile every moment. He couldn't marry another, so he dreamed that Rustica would take responsibility for him. Soon the time came to leave for Shalia, and our heroes were ready. But Jay and Bella, determined, also prepared to go with them and not let go of their sister. Seeing them, Hayden tried to explain that Rustica had matters to attend to in Shalia. But the girls were willing to do anything to go with their older sister and their godfather. Je got so excited that she ran to hug her older sister. So that she wouldn't abandon them, the girls could no longer let her go. They dreamed of living together. Rustica had to leave, so the count and countess supported the little ones. After saying goodbye to her father, the heroine promised to see him in 3 days at the national funeral. Holding the girl tightly, the emperor took responsibility for her safety. Icarus flapped its wings and took off. It was time to return to Shalia. It turned out that Icarus didn't imagine how difficult it would be for Rue, where all the aristocrats would gather. But she had her father and mother, capable of supporting her as they should. For the first time in a long time, Rue was no longer alone. Her family was always close. Soon, Shalia was flooded with the news that the emperor had finished the expedition and was returning. People couldn't believe he finished with the West so quickly. High society should not have underestimated him just because of his youth. At that moment, the wings of magical beasts cut through the air. The Imperials appeared in the sky. Near the ground, cries of joy were heard. The people wished long life to His Majesty. Nothing happened during his absence. Otherwise, they would have notified him immediately. The state funeral followed protocol. Priests care for the bodies, and every morning there is a service. Simon wanted to know if the emperor planned to keep Lady Rustica at the palace during the funeral. Ru didn't need such formalities. She simply had to be close to Hayden. Teleporting to the palace, Hayden decided to exhibit all the collected artifacts. Sir Ru personally assaulted the treasure vault of the Cadet Palace. Seeing that even the Count Palatine is fascinated, it can be said that they are truly remarkable treasures. Suddenly, Simon noticed that the Lord should not have treated Lady Rustica as his own. In other words, the emperor should not address a lady whose identity has not been revealed as his own in an official capacity. In that case, Hayden declared a war where men will fight for Rustica's heart and, of course, he considered himself the sole victor. For every 5 family members who managed to return, a 10-day mourning period was declared. But even during the mourning period, journalists fulfilled their duty. They presented the sensational news of the sudden change of Consul of Caeta. For Aldwin, it was obvious that the Emperor of Persetta had something to do with it. He perfectly saw how Hayden dragged Rustica everywhere. The press even wrote that he squeezed her dry. However, Eliza believed that Lady Rustica was an adult capable of making her own decisions. The boy was enraged that the Emperor only made an announcement about Miss Genus's dismissal, and he named Aldwin Rochester as the new ambassador. Rustica made her decision, and His Majesty understood. The Lord couldn't believe this was possible, as he knew a different girl. Rustica left, and Aldwin became the ambassador of Caeta. Then, Eliza's task was clear from the start. Her objective was the shadow, the one who would reveal the traitor. The news that Lady Rustica Janus found the bodies of 5 members of the royal family was shocking. All Eliza needed now was an order from His Majesty. The news in the newspaper reached Rustica, and Hayden couldn't wait to see her reaction. Thanks to him, the girl became a target for everyone in the Caeta Empire, and she couldn't leave the palace. Still, she didn't expect the emperor to give her such honors for finding the bodies. But now, the most important thing for the master was whether her bed was comfortable, and if she liked the food. She learned from a lady that guests must be received with caution. Although Hayden was secured with the money she had gotten from selling the bear he captured. Remembering that, the girl declared that she now had nothing. All her savings were in the cabin in the woods. It was her home. In that case, the master decided to go recover what originally belonged to Ru. The heroine hadn't been out of the house long, but what they saw surprised them both. Everything in the cabin looked as if a bear that knew how to use the door had entered. Apparently, they cleaned everything thoroughly inside. However, the girl was more worried about the children. The woman who taught them to read and write disappeared, and then horrible guys burst in destroying the house. It seems Ru has already resigned herself to the fact that her home, where she lived for years, looks this deplorable. Assuming there was no one else there, the protagonist decided to leave that place. However, Hayden didn't follow her immediately. He preferred to inspect the area a bit. The surroundings suggested that Caeta might have used some kind of magic on this site. Walking cautiously through the birch forest, Rustica calculated every step to find the exact spot. Upon reaching a specific tree, she asked Hayden to hand her the shovel. Since his master simply forgot, he took on the task of digging up the hidden treasure. He wasn't going to end up with his own hands, but he would use the magical powers residing in his hands. In this way, the heroine finally obtained her gold bars, which she missed so much. Also, just in case, she exchanged a couple of bars for precious gems. There were so few bars that the emperor didn't believe they would use Ru for such little pay. They had nothing else, although insufficient greed could also be a problem. But the heroine considered herself greedy. Nothing matched her desire to kill the emperor. Other than that, she dreamed of living with her family, something she couldn't do for a long time. In reality, she saw herself as shy and sensitive, not as good as she seemed. Still, as a knight, she gave her rations to the hungry knight children and suppressed envy. It turns out she even forgot that she promised not to send him to the battlefield. It seems the Lord was the only one who remembered what had happened between them. Seeing the disappointment in his eyes, Rustica justified herself by saying she was absorbed in her problems. Perhaps she forgot the details, but she still remembered that blonde boy. In that case, Hayden hoped she remembered some conversation with him. In reality, the protagonist didn't forget him, but how she was before. That time when everything was fine seemed so distant, almost unreal. For a second, Ru thought the cause was the curse on her head. However, in front of Hayden, she could be as confident and shameless as she wished. The important thing is that he remembered everything and complained like a child. Let him apologize. If Rustica kept looking at him like that, the emperor promised she would remember everything. After all, he doesn't have a face that is easily forgotten. They had nothing else to do there, so they decided to return. After all, Hayden swore he could enter and leave without problems. However, Rue flatly objected. The diplomatic situation was tense because of her. Ignoring her opinion, the emperor still thought he should visit Carlos. Considering how Emperor Kaeda suddenly appeared at the embassy, there must be magic there. Without even giving her time to answer, the girl just wanted to say they shouldn't cause problems now. And if war starts, Rue won't even be able to contribute. She was waiting for the opportunity to decapitate Carlos. In that case, the Lord agreed to start the war after lifting most of the curses. After their conversation, Hayden took the girl to the garden to give her something. As if he had eyes in the back of his head, he noticed she wanted to say something and told her not to hold back. The heroine thought it was too much, but still dared to ask. She longed to know Hayden's age, but that question put him against the wall. 430 years have passed since the children's remains returned. He was also taken then. Lord Constant was kidnapped when he was a child. He was 13 years old, and upon waking, he was in the laboratory that Rustica found behind Kaeda's treasure vault. Then he slept again, as if time stood still, and upon waking, he was before the Great Barrier as a knight. So 400 years passed with his growth temporarily halted during sleep. They met when the seasons changed 8 times. Hayden was 15, and Rue was 17. That bastard used people as disposable tools, but his age was not suitable for war. However, Rustica did not hide her joy that the Lord had survived. She cared about knowing the age of the men she liked. He could be older or younger. Hayden suddenly remembered that, upon ending the mourning, the funerals would be held. And he wanted, oh yes he did, that all members of the Gen's house be there. Rustica entered the imperial family, and as part of the Gen's house, she had to attend. But more importantly, the Lord unexpectedly asked her to sit down. Today, he wanted to give her a gift he had prepared only for her. At funerals, you cannot wear flashy, loud jewelry, but pearls were worth it. And besides, Hayden loved the earrings. A spell to help break the curse and protect her. Upon seeing such beauty, the protagonist smiled widely, and a blush rose to her cheeks. It turned out that the emperor had them made with pearls that Rue had brought with her own hands. It was, in a way, compensation for the money she had left at the embassy. Hayden was flattered that the girl liked the earrings, as she had never owned anything like them. Now that he knew what she liked, he promised to make sure she had plenty. With him, the protagonist could be honest. The master wanted to know everything she liked. Memories of that crazy night assaulted her right now. Having another memory to cling to, the emperor felt blissful. In order not to avoid Hayden, the girl became curious to know what else he remembered about her. The master remembered everything, even things Rustica might have forgot. After this, the emperor decided to end the meeting and promise to see each other again. The beating of her heart, like the rustle of the wind, it was the only sound Rue heard at that moment. Even nobles from the east and west gathered with citizens on the day of the funeral for the 5 royals who returned. It was rumored that the consul of Kaeda would attend the ceremony, but no one knew if it was the current one or the previous one. It was said that the people of Kaeda had completely settled in the west, which they considered vulgar. Unlike the Easterners, these only knew how to wield swords and aimed to rule the territory. Suddenly, silence invaded the hall. His Majesty, Emperor Persetta Hayden Constant, had arrived. Rustica never imagined, at the funeral, that the wise men would participate in this event. Both guardians from the east and west followed Hayden. Although the nobility's opinions were divided, the wise men continued to offer their support. Soon the ceremony began. There is no pain as great as the memory of joy in current sorrow. The thin thread between the world and the heavens broke. 5 children deceased forever were being bid farewell. May eternal peace accompany them, and upon them eternal peace and God's blessing. Rustica tried to understand what it feels like to lose everyone who was ever by her side, and after the horror experienced, try to survive completely alone. The young woman could not imagine how much that pain burned her heart. During the event, she unexpectedly heard a familiar voice. Sir Keika was happy to see Lady Rustica Felesca again. He had heard that the conquest of the West was a success, and wanted to know if everything was fine. Suddenly, Eliza interrupted their conversation, and Ruth had to stop. It turns out the emperor was urgently awaiting the arrival of the genes. So she was forced to bid a polite farewell and withdraw, bowing. During all that time, Hayden waited patiently for his chosen one, lost in thought. Seeing Rustica, a carefree smile lit up his face and his eyes shone. Although it was Miss Jean's first event, thanks to the emperor, she was calm. Hayden always said it, but she looks spectacular, and today she attracted all the attention. Not only when the heroine was silent, but also when speaking. She was incredibly elegant. She was so magnificent that Hayden found it hard to resist. But now they had to go somewhere, so he invited the girl to accompany him. However, before accepting, the heroine made a face that denoted concern. If the lady felt uncomfortable with him, the emperor only wanted to know the truth. In reality, he was not ready for that, but he promised to do everything possible so she wouldn't feel that way. Rustica wasn't sure such a conversation was appropriate at a funeral, but she still didn't understand why the emperor was so interested in someone as common as her. The truth was that Hayden had always dreamed of marrying his first love. Of course, he wasn't making a formal proposal now and wasn't going to force Miss Jeannie's, but the Lord had no intention of giving up either. In any case, it was time to leave, as they had already kept someone waiting. The guardians of the West and East were already awaiting their arrival, and upon seeing Rue, Ophelia was very happy. However, the Lord, whose attention was fixed exclusively on the ambassador, was suspiciously silent. The Lord made the young lady uncomfortable when he looked at her like that. Ophelia almost forgot to introduce the Dragon Lord, who for a long time protected this country from the East. The Lord was happy to meet Miss Jens and asked to simply be called Melpheus. Ophelia remembered all those children. They were weak from birth and the youngest. That's why they died like that, as if they simply fell asleep in the laboratory. It was a peaceful death. Melpheus blamed himself for not being able to use enough strength to protect them. All he could do was drag people across the Great Barrier for 400 years. Rustico remembered that many people and knights, kidnapped from Caeta at that time, were brought here. She was stunned to hear that during that time, the Lord had sent 100,000 people to the wall. The girl knew very different things about those who returned here, to Caeta. The members of his army who crossed the barrier turned into magical creatures. They even said they had turned into horrible monsters. The heroine couldn't imagine that they weren't magical creatures, but people. Worrying was useless. Carlos always mastered magic and illusion. According to Hayden, that's why such a difficult barrier to overcome was created. Carlos just wanted to make sure no one could leave his boundaries. Furthermore, Melpheus knew that Miss Genese wanted to kill two birds with one stone. But Hayden intervened and asked him to attend to the man they brought. And since they were talking about it, the emperor asked the master to look at Rustica's curse. Since the last time Melpheus saw the curse, it had become more subtle and complex, and Carlos had become very skilled at handling the stolen power. This curse was more treacherous and cruel than the one imposed on the tower owner. Lady Rustica probably understood it, but the dragon master couldn't touch Ophelia's curse. Cowardly, Carlos made sure Melpheus couldn't break any of his curses. The heroine was only curious, but she never imagined that the truth hid something like this. Still, now everything could be different. So the Lord took a risk and tried something. With magic, he created a fire dragon and sent it straight towards the lady. When the magical tongues of fire touched her body, Runo held on and fell onto Hayden. Melpheus couldn't stop it, he couldn't even undo the curse. However, it damaged her, weakening her in some way. And that was crucial. Thanks to the Lord being the Empire's last line of defense, they managed to get this far. Rue believed that the cracked curse would break sooner or later, thanking the Lord for his attempt. Lady Janice left the hall. And then, Melpheus wondered what Hayden planned to do with Carlos's heir. Now the balance was broken, driving them forward, regardless of methods or means. Ophelia suddenly declared that the process to lift the traitor heir's curse must be accelerated. They went through so many difficulties to bring her, they couldn't allow her to die. Hayden was sure that would be a loss for all of them. In any case, the Lord wanted to go back to sleep. He didn't need to be awake while the Emperor was there. Despite being the elder and dreaming of retirement, Hayden planned to exhaust him to death. He had so much work that he might soon need to wake up the sovereign. Therefore, the master ordered him not to expect restful sleep for long. Meanwhile, hidden from view, Eliza awaited information on where the milady was staying. But they hid her very well. It was impossible to get close to her. No one knows where Rustica is. And if they know, they won't say a word. They only had to wait. After all, they were already used to it. Rumors were circulating that the empire was trying to turn the funeral into a monster subjugation party. So, Eliza decided to find out the traitor's whereabouts to fulfill the emperor's order. And until then, the lady, hiding her identity under a hood, decided to withdraw, and she melted into the crowd. Upon her return to the palace, Rustica was greeted with joy, and a splendid breakfast awaited her. She couldn't, as always, eat bread for breakfast, because today her lord awaited her. Bowing, the girl greeted the son of the empire, as everyone did. Hayden, however, didn't care what others did, as long as they didn't violate the imperial order. Or else, he was going to show what it means to always be the exception. At breakfast, the heroine said that before she couldn't fully move, but now she trained every day. They had just removed the curse, but if she trained like before, Hayden would worry. She didn't like Rue's approach to matters at all, but then the girl told him to propose his own. Since Rue needed to train anyway, he proposed training alone at night. Rustica was so embarrassed by these words that she suggested eating first. Always willing to help, Hayden sometimes needed her, but he wanted to see her always. What the girl implied by the word need was different from what he implied. Miss Jeans referred to a purely formal sense, while the emperor referred to a deeply personal one. From how casually Hayden said these things, it was clear he was quite the player. But even knowing that, Rue felt a frantic beat in her chest. For some reason. By the way, there was one thing the girl taught him that night. Pay attention to the conditions that arise when choosing a romantic partner. How interesting. The girl was perplexed to hear that he, in fact, met several conditions. First, the lady liked attractive men, and she told Hayden so many times. Alcohol made Rue a bit more honest, and she told him he was handsome, in face and body. Furthermore, she mentioned that the young man kissed very well and that she liked kissing him. The Lord saved his first time for someone special, but Rue took it from him and acted as if nothing happened. There was no better way to describe her feelings. The silly lady abandoned him. Anyway, Hayden hoped she wouldn't think about sleeping with the first man who crossed her path. But Rustica had already escaped that foolish life, and her response saved many lives. The emperor really disliked sharing, especially when it came to people. What he hated most in the world was the idea of sharing his beloved with another man. It seems he was truly willing to kill anyone who dared to desire his lady. And if the protagonist got curious, she could always test him. Except for that, Hayden is an open and decent person. Although people who call themselves decent, by Rustica's standards, are quite strange. In that case, the Lord assumed he hadn't been good enough that night. Since they kissed, until they bowed their heads together, Rula repeated many times. Especially when he held her by the waist, she said many times how good it felt. Now that the meal was over, it seemed the emperor had to return to his duties. However, he had already finished his duties and wanted to take their relationship to the next level. After the informal part, Hayden wanted to exchange gifts and set the wedding date. Rustica did not consider herself a suitable option as an impeccable noble lady. That's why the emperor couldn't even get angry with her, and he wanted to judge her flaws himself. If she hadn't proven her worth sufficiently, he promised to try even harder. His gift was a surprise, so that Rue would stop looking for non-existent flaws in herself. Upon seeing the jewel, the heroine was convinced it belonged to Emperor Kaeda. According to Hayden, he retouched the bracelet, and now the girl had the chance to wear it at the banquet. The Lord dreamed of being her partner at the banquet in honor of the successful conquest of the Western lands. With all his might, he tried to prove that no one in Perseid surpassed him. Rustica reluctantly accepted, since the emperor could strengthen her and her family. But she flatly refused to accept something that belonged to that bastard. Asking for trust, Hayden claimed to have perfected the bracelet. Knowing that Rue was impatient, the emperor had no choice but to moderate his speed. The curse was stronger on the hand, the most important part for magic. Therefore, the heroine had to resist the elimination of the curse with Carlos's bracelet. Not only was Emperor Kaeda's power locked in it, but also Hayden's magic. Little by little, the magical chains began to disappear. Rue was very stubborn and resisted firmly, looking at her hand with tears in her eyes. She couldn't believe the curse was fading before her eyes. So, this time Hayden will be the one to rescue the young Miss Jeans. Not all chains could be broken at once, or it would tear off her fingers or even her hand. Even if the master does everything right, it will hurt her a lot. The pain of removing the curse from her finger was so intense that Rue couldn't imagine what would happen to her head. Hayden asked her not to suppress the pain, but she was very embarrassed. Besides, she didn't want him to touch her with his lips, but to use something else. However, Hayden really liked it when his lady felt no pain. And of course, he loved spending time with her like that. Her concerns were only that he showed weakness when they were in Calais. At least there he listened to Rustica and always spoke courteously. Since the girl felt better this way, the emperor planned to return to that arrangement. At that moment, Hayden took her hand and spoke as if returning from high society. He was glad it wasn't like that. Besides, they were already finished. Now, the protagonist had to wear the bracelet daily and wear the earrings they gave her. Trying to prevent the emperor from saying nonsense, Rustica believed he hadn't learned from her. In the past, she gave young Hayden bread in exchange for good behavior. She took on the burden of protecting him from danger and from eating too fast. And tomorrow, she promised to give him more bread and milk. Praying every night to his late mother, Hayden thought Rustica was an angel sent by her. Although, of course, no angel would teach him to use the sword in such a strange way. She always praised him for his solid foundation, alternating compliments with punishments, but she didn't want Hayden to spend his whole life paying her back for her care. Rue saved the master when he was ruined, and he would return the favor by standing by her in bad times. Suddenly, the protagonist felt unwell, and the conversation had to be postponed. As the emperor carried her to her room, he reminded her of the upcoming banquet. Although Rue never did anything like that, no one would be better than her as the emperor's partner. The weakened girl fell asleep quickly, but Hayden couldn't take his eyes off her. She told him everything, being sincere, and the master hoped she would be happy in her dreams. That day, while everyone was busy training, Aldwin suddenly decided to be absent. Presenting himself before His Majesty, he arrived to greet the eternal son of the Caeda Empire. By order of the emperor, the young man revealed that Rustica is now under the protection of the Imperials, and the emperor in the Chalet Palace, and a festive banquet will soon be held, in which the appearance of Lady Rustica is expected. According to Aldwin, Eliza Varkova is already preparing for the banquet that will take place in a week. Rustica Jens will inevitably meet her end there. After giving the order to cancel the mission, Carlos decided to deal with Rustica himself. If it weren't for Lady Greta, Rue would have found it difficult to prepare an outfit for the banquet. All the satin fabric ran out, and the ladies were very upset about not being able to order satin dresses. But for the lady, that is not a problem, as they have prepared a special fabric for her. And exquisite. To complement the pearl accessories, they sewed her a pure cream-colored silk dress. As her mother believed, blue was usually used in the fabric for vows of fidelity, but Mrs. Greta was sure that cream better enhanced her pure beauty. And elegant, the Countess didn't even notice how her daughter grew up and was ready for marriage. It turned out that Rue's father's intuition in these matters was quite terrifying. Mom was just trying to say that the emperor is out of your reach. No one had seen His Majesty show such interest in anyone in his entire service. All the things Rustica uses now, the emperor gave them to her. The heroine had never before thought about what she would do if he confessed his feelings. Milan believed her daughter was one of those who can make a man fall in love, even if he is blind. It's natural that feelings could arise in their relationship since they were young, but often it's not the case. Being from an enemy country, they should live cautiously for a few more generations. No matter how many achievements they gain, they will never be recognized with certainty. The emperor's position was not ideal. He will have to marry the appropriate lady from the East. The parents didn't want to force their daughter into a marriage of convenience, but they wanted Rustica to meet someone who understood her and support her. The lack of strong parental support from the bride's side would be a weakness. Milan only wished for her daughter to experience happiness, forgetting the suffering and the tears, and he was in a position where he couldn't even hold his daughter normally. Rue could marry a high-status man for money, but Mom didn't believe it was like that. Earning money through sweat and blood, neither mother nor father expected Rustica to bring money home. They simply didn't want others pointing fingers at their precious daughter. Memories and emotions are important, but sometimes you have to let them go for a while. This is just a slip-up that had to come to an end. The protagonist knew it and was prepared to end her relationship. But inexplicably, the pain in her soul did not cease, as if leaving a scar. Now that there was nothing to worry about, Rue also knew everything, and she didn't want to be a burden to her parents. It hurt her so much to lose Hayden, but she couldn't turn her back on the family she had recovered. Tears ran down her cheeks, as a sign of gratitude and forgiveness for having left him. Shortly after, Aldwin reported the emperor's order, instructing Elise not to kill Rustica, but to watch her and not to forget to monitor the rumors, as plans could be hatched in the dirty alleys. In a bar, some men were commenting that the emperor had stationed police near the palace. Here people talked about the emperor as casually as about their daily food. If a man with more dignity ruled well, they surely wouldn't talk like that. The emperor of this country was far from being a worthy ruler in Alyssa's eyes. Lately, everyone notices that the alley children eat well thanks to the palace hospital. No matter how much the nobility protests, the workers like the new emperor. And a lot. Alyssa understood that this emperor was desperate enough to care about the poor. On the day of the first ball, Count Hayden's daughter arrived too early. Without giving her time to dress, he just wanted to finish early and wait for her, as if they were the perfect couple. What irony. So, Rustica ran like the devil, possessed to her chambers to get dressed quickly. But the servants decided to take it easy and start. Because of the petticoat, it was decided that the ribbon around her waist should match the color of her eyes. Considering that the emperor would be Rue's partner, the full skirt was the ideal choice. In a cream-colored dress with green ribbons that brought out her eyes, Rustica looked stunning. Mrs. Greta finished faster than Hayden expected, so he promised to reward her. For him, it was a great honor to be the partner of the charming Rustica tonight. Before arriving, the emperor ordered the young lady to wait in another room and enter a little later. When Emperor Hayden entered the palace, Simon presented the son of the empire, and the knights bowed their heads. Seeing him, Rustica, confused, bowed her head in respect. However, the lord immediately ordered her to relax and use her head. Unable to resist, Hayden was captivated by the young lady's beauty and held her tightly. They had to separate for a while, so the emperor ordered the guard to protect the lady. Immediately after, he ordered Simon to prepare a full report. It seems the embassy of Qaeda is still trying to find something compromising about them. Also, there are indications that Aldwin secretly visited Kadat, and Eliza was investigating in dark alleys. The situation with the monsters in the north and west remained calm, as expected. If the situation worsens, the emperor threatened to simply destroy the west. And the north. A large part of Qaeda is useless land, so Carlos kept the southern regions. And center. It turned out that all the nobles attended the banquet. What a surprise! The emperor was almost touched by his conscience towards him. They deserved praise for their loyalty. The time has come to present the son of prosperity. His Majesty, the emperor, has arrived. Thanks to the hard work of the empire, this year they will be able to enjoy a full social season. After taking his throne, Haydn truly hoped everyone would have fun. Looking at the faces of the guests, without a trace of joy, the lord did not change his decision. The ball will start even, though everyone seemed very unhappy. It seemed that at the banquet celebrating victory, all guests should be happy. Working hard, the emperor tried his best to destroy the monsters for the nation's safety. But now it greatly affected him that everyone around him seemed discontented. Confused, the lord and the lady couldn't even express how grateful they were to his majesty. It turned out to be more boring than Hayden thought, hoping there would be something more interesting. According to Simon, there was something his majesty needed to check personally. It turns out Lady Rustica Jens and Fellas, who returned royal remains, prepared a gift for the lord. To the sound of drums, Miss Jens entered the throne room, holding a huge tray. For the peace of her daughter, Countess Malen hoped it was just a fleeting feeling. Bowing her head, the young lady wanted to greet the son of the empire, but Hayden ordered her to forget it. As expected, in front of everyone, the emperor refused to accept the greeting of an inferior family. With all his might, Simon tried to hint that he shouldn't behave so obviously. Lady Rustica brought the sacred symbol that, by right, should belong to his majesty. It was considered lost for a long time. However, the lady regretted that not all its parts were there. She believed that at least some parts could increase the honor of the emperor and Persetta. They are the treasures of Persetta that Carlos Ingram stole from the royal treasury 430 years ago. Their shine was so incredible that no one doubted their authenticity. Rustica was happy to recover those two insignia, the imperial scepter and orb. But two symbols of the imperial crown were still missing, the crown and the sword. However, the finding of those two lost symbols was equally striking. The most valuable treasures were brought to Hayden, and he couldn't just accept them. That's why he was willing to do whatever Miss Jennings wished. Ra wanted nothing in return, only that the emperor remember this meeting. Perhaps, in the future, she would decide to ask his majesty for a favor. If the occasion arose, she asked for the honor of personally decapitating Carlos Ingram. As expected, the daughter of the Fellas Counts was a true warrior. Since that was not in the plan script, Hayden begged her to retract. He declared that it was inappropriate to discuss a war with Qaeda at this time. If the Emperor of Qaeda put these lands in danger, Rustica would go to the front. The Countess never imagined her daughter would ask the Emperor to decapitate Carlos. Only that answer would relieve the stigma on the Yens for originating from Qaeda. In that case, Hayden assumed they were trying to use her will for something uncertain. He longed to fulfill that wish. Not only his own, but that of his entire family escaped from Qaeda. If it were easy to fulfill, it wouldn't be a simple wish, right? However, the Emperor promised to give her that right to Lady Rustica if the day came. Hayden felt rejected because of the damn Carlos. If it weren't for Rue's curse, he would have cut off his head instantly. After killing that bastard Carlos, Hayden dreamed of completely filling Lady Rue's head with him. When the ball started, there was a long debate about who His Majesty would dance with. Some thought he could simply say he wasn't interested in the banquet. The nobility was convinced that after defeating the largest wave of monsters, conversations about marriage would begin. His Majesty could not leave the position of Empress vacant forever, especially with her talents. But for them, the people of the West, it would hardly matter. The most suitable option would be one of the daughters of the Eastern Noble Alliance, the Omsen Coalition. They covet fertile lands and even aspire to the imperial throne out of sheer greed. Another candidate was the daughter of Duke Alenka, Katarina Lambert. She arrived at the ball accompanied by her brother, the firstborn of Duke Alenk, Count of Elche, named Manuel Lambert. Amidst the crowd, Catalina suddenly spotted the daughter of Marquis Sven Ivan. Lady Lambert was not sure if the Emperor would even dance tonight. As they said, no one could force the man who fought monsters on the imperial front lines. Besides Catalina, there were more than 20 noble ladies from the Omsen coalition in the hall. That's why her brother wanted her to try even harder and dance with the Emperor. The lady assumed that His Majesty desired a duel among the Eastern nobility for a place by his side. Throughout the music, the Emperor waited for his lady, but Rustica was already late. After expressing her desire, the young lady thought her obligations were over. However, they were just state matters that prevented them from being alone. None of that mattered. Hayden was ready to invite Miss Jeans to dance. Right now, just one dance, a gesture in honor of whoever organized this event. In the dance they merged. Their bodies as extensions told a love story. In Calette, the girl only guarded the ladies dancing in that manner. Not everything was bad. Sometimes she also felt like dressing up and dancing. But Hayden noticed that, in his arms, the girl was thinking of another. He wanted Miss Janice to only think of him when dancing, and he instantly remembered her request. For the first time, he understood that Rue trusted him. The Lord couldn't believe he needed a public confirmation. The heroine was smart and knew that His Majesty couldn't refuse. Hayden himself wanted to destroy that bastard, often imagining his suffering. And when everything was over, he allowed the girl to take Carlos's head without objection. However, with a wish, Rue preferred to be addressed as a noble, not as a woman. The Emperor had already promised her something publicly, so he wanted to get something personal in return. But the lady dismissed it so easily, even though she didn't agree with it at all. In that case, if everything went well, the Emperor asked for something in return. But first, he wanted to know what wish Miss Jens would ask for if all these problems didn't exist. Rue wished for nothing more than what the Emperor promised her. She dreamed of a family, and Hayden gave it to her. Unfortunately, it was not a lie. And that's why the Lord hated that bastard. Carlos took up so much space in Lady Rustica's head that there was no room left for Hayden. Actually, there might be something else. A wish different from revenge. Something so valuable that Rue hid it deep within her being. Something that could never, ever see the light of day again. In a short time, the Count was happy to see his daughter healthy, safe, and rosy. Meanwhile, Eland demonstrated his talent at a social reception. Rue's longing was to reunite with her parents, and now that it was fulfilled, she needed nothing else. However, Lord Ethan couldn't understand how a young woman could want nothing. Suddenly, the Count noticed some people. It had been so long since he enjoyed seeing them. According to one night, today's party was a truly joyful event for the Shen's house. The Count's daughter did incredibly well. That's why the lords wanted to greet her in person. But the father declared that today she had to rest, as she had worked hard. It turns out Ruby contributed nothing to enrich the national treasury. After talking with those men, Ethan was left with a bad feeling. But Viscountess Paynham quickly dispelled his sadness with her arrival, and that of her son Nicholas. Nicholas Stewart was very kind and greeted Miss Jeans with great pleasure. The young man couldn't miss this opportunity and invited the lady to dance. He was 1,000 times better than those nobles who shamelessly hinted at marriage. And dance for reputation. Nicholas had only read about the symbols of the imperial family in historical texts. Dancing with him was very easy. Before, when Ruby danced with Hayden, she always got nervous. It was difficult to hide admiration for such a beautiful lady who also brought great treasures. Seeing them, Hayden made the decision to find another way to dispose of the monster corpses. His dancing was imperfect. Nicholas was not a master and often stumbled. At that moment, the protagonist believed that Hayden had foreseen everything by dancing with him. When Rustica danced with the Emperor, everything was perfect. She erred due to her nerves. Putting aside all thoughts of him, the young lady decided to focus on the man in front of her. After all, His Majesty was simply whom she served. Soon the dance ended, and Miss Jins was left alone. She constantly wondered if Hayden was watching her. She shouldn't think about him. After all, she had already promised to forget him. As promised, her father brought her fresh orange juice. For his daughter, he would do anything. The heroine got tired of thinking that she might end up alone if every man was like Hayden. Now was not the ideal time to think about men. Her goal was revenge. As soon as she got the emperor out of her head, she suddenly noticed the son of the empire again. As expected, she became the perfect target for society ladies. To be honest, Rustica knew that Hayden couldn't have eyes only for her. Her father distracted her thoughts a little. It turns out he dances wonderfully. Count Ethan was good at everything, which is why he had high demands for men. Actually, Rue missed him a lot, and her father was happy she was home again. The Count's daughter was a true lady. She looked splendid, and the dress suited her great. She didn't know people chatted so much while dancing, until she met the man who stepped on her dress. In public, everyone takes care of their image. That's why they use dancing for private conversations. Today, the Count was going to take his daughter, but first he asked her to calm her sisters. Rue's feat in Belfort impressed them, and now they want to be knights. Only the little one needed time. After all, they are still little girls. Ethan remembered that Rustica was the same when she was little. He completely forgot that she broke her leg at the age of 8, when she fell off her horse trying to be like her mother. It was time to rest. This was a suitable place with high security, but what she saw made the heroine realize that not even His Majesty could ignore the Alesmond coalition. Of course, that's why he was dancing with Duchess Alenka, influential in the East. Already late in the night, Siriton met an old acquaintance at the ball. Sir Manuel heard that the lord had a hard time with those monsters. Rustica introduced herself kindly and met Manuel Lambert. At that moment, Count Elch locked eyes with the emperor, who was staring fixedly at them. Sure that the lady was tired of the greetings, Manuel said goodbye. Already late, before leaving, Mom ordered Rustica to write 3 times a day. More farewells were unnecessary. The girl would truly rest when her parents left. Soon the carriage started, while the protagonist was lost in her thoughts. Her mind was occupied with only one thing. Hayden was the source of her nightmares and musings. But suddenly, the carriage stopped abruptly, and Miss Janice almost fell from the surprise. At that moment, she felt someone grab her arm tightly and drag her forward. Without strength to resist, Rustica fell violently to the ground and felt intense weakness. But when she finally gathered strength to look her enemy in the eyes, she saw her death. The man she so dreamed of decapitating finally gave her that opportunity.